Shut up, Wesley.
Would you like me to be the cat?
And if I'm going to live rent-free in his head...
A red, white and blue Brexit.
I'm actually very right-wing, and I loved it.
That is a disgrace.
Mr. Peter Bone. Shut up, Wesley.
And if I'm going to live rent-free in his head...
Fucking neoliberalism.
They're having a disco.
Fucking neoliberalism. Fucking neoliberalism. Fucking neoliberalism. Fucking neoliberalism.
Vegan sausage roll.
I'm actually very right-wing, and I loved it.
Shut up, Wesley.
You are a liar.
Good evening, chat. How are we doing? Good to see everyone. It's going to be my last stream for a week. Going on holiday. Going on holiday, chat. So you won't see me live until the 26th, I believe. I'm off to Zanzi with my family. The quiet bit, of course. But we're off for a week, which should be nice. It was booked ages ago, before they announced the election. But it's not like I can just give up on a holiday to cover the election. But you will still get content. I will still give you content, whether it's clips that I will have uploaded previously and then have scheduled for during the week, or new stuff that I record on the fly. There will still be more content whilst I'm away. Don't you worry. Don't you worry. I will still be making some content for you. It just won't be live streams. It'll be pre-recorded content, most likely. I know, right? Although, to be fair, the weather's been pretty nice today. Actually been pretty nice weather today.
Fucking neoliberalism.
13 months of base politics, baby, you.
Thank you very much for the 13-month Prime sub. Thank you very much for 13 months of throwing your Bezos bucks in my direction to keep me employed here on twitch.tv. Will I be streaming on election night? Yes, I will be streaming 24 hours on election night. Don't you worry, there will be plenty of election night content. And election day content. We'll be doing lots. Just be safe to say, I will be doing lots of election coverage. Absolutely, perfectly refreshed. But as I said, I will still need to make content whilst I'm away. I can't just not earn money whilst I'm on holiday. So you will get a non-zero amount of content whilst I'm in Greece. Anyway, with that in mind, let's watch some content.
It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Labour's promising to set up a national wealth fund to create 650,000 jobs for skilled workers such as plumbers, electricians and engineers.
It means better, well-paid jobs, and it means living standards rising. People will be better off with a Labour government.
In the next hour, Reform UK sets out its election promises.
We're unashamedly patriotic and we believe that immigration, the exploding population, should be the major issue in this election.
A clear acceptance from a senior Conservative that they're unlikely to win the election.
It's possible to win the election. Do I accept it's not the most likely outcome? Yes, I accept that. I'm a realist.
The tech giants, are they too powerful and treating us like modern-day serfs? One of our guests thinks they are. Joining us today, Minister for Disabled People, Conservative Mims Davis, Labour peer and former General Secretary of the TUC.
Imagine being a Conservative Cabinet Minister for Disabled People. Imagine, literally imagine, being a Conservative Minister for the Disabled and not hanging your head in shame wherever you go in this country.
Francis O'Grady, former Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis and author and broadcaster Timandra Harkness. This is Politics Live.
Timandra? Is that a foreign name?
Election 2024. Welcome to viewers on BBC Two, BBC iPlayer and BBC News. You heard in the headlines the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps saying he's a realist when it comes to the likelihood of the Conservatives winning the election. In an interview with Times Radio, he accepts it's not the most likely outcome. Do you agree, Mims Davis, there's very little chance of your party winning the election?
Well, I think it's about fighting for every vote, getting on every doorstep and chatting to people. And of course, there's a mountain to climb. We've been in power for 15 years. 5 of those with the Lib Dems, so they've had a bit of amnesia on that, you might have noticed. And there's changed boundaries and we're up against it. But Grant's a realist, Conservatives are pragmatists, and we're going to get on and fight very hard for the best outcome we can get for the Prime Minister and our great party. And
are you a realist too?
Well, I was just saying earlier, I love campaigning. So for me...
Well, thank goodness for that.
Well, absolutely. Very sore feet. We've been to a lot of pubs and coffee shops because it's been a rather wet campaign, I must
But do you genuinely
say.
think it's going to make any difference to the actual outcome?
Every conversation matters, because I think there's lots of, oh, it's chaos, it's hell out there. And then you talk to people and they go, actually, I'm doing all right. I've got my business going. I've got my car going. I've got my roof.
It'll be very unlikely if you just speak to most people and they'll say they've got a business going. Most people work. Most people are workers. Most people don't own businesses, Mims.
Roof over my head, and actually we've been through tough times.
Although they do sound like the sort of basics and fundamentals for most people. Let me just show you.
Take that for granted. We've been through a pandemic, a war. We have got the impact of that on our continent, and other countries are also having tough times.
All right.
And I think you need to remind the voters, whether it's the £400 billion that we've given in the pandemic to help.
You can save some of the slogans for a little later on in the
Not
programme.
a slogan, a fact.
All right,
that
a
money
fact.
is
Let me just show you.
money.
Let me just show you this headline in the Times, because some of your former colleagues are obviously looking ahead to life.
Mims is short for Miriam, Les.
Under a potential Labour government. Andrea Leadsom, former minister, I'd worked with the Labour government, former Tory MP who ran for leadership, tells Times Radio she's already held talks with Wes Streeting about helping families. That's the shadow help.
Of course, Andrea Leadsom. Of course, Wes Streeting is looking to employ the services, or at least take the advice of Andrea Leadsom. I guess he just needs advice for someone who has kids, right?
Health Secretary. Do you wish her luck?
I'd be shocked if Andrea wouldn't want to continue any work around the first 1,000 days of babies' lives. It's something she's completely dedicated to, and she's still a government minister, so she's still doing what I have to do, is keep things going until a new government is formed.
Does it feel like 1997, Francis?
No, I don't think it does.
So
and
no landslide.
I think one of the concerns about Grant Shapps' statement is that he's trying to encourage a complacency amongst people who are thinking of voting Labour. So Labour's going to have to fight for every vote and not take it for granted. But he's also trying to distract from the fact that this is the first Parliament where families are worse off than they were at the start. And, no amount of sloganising can get over that fact that people have had it up to here with the cost of living crisis, with the psychodrama in the Tory party. And I think we'll probably come on to this later, but a real failure to stand up to reform.
Well, it may be Labour's responsibility too to do exactly that. I think we can show you pictures in a moment of Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, out campaigning with Rachel Reeves. We'll wait for those to come through. I think they're somewhere on the south coast. While we talk to Yanis Varoufakis, watching this election from the outside. Yanis, do you agree we're probably looking at a Labour victory, and perhaps a big Labour victory?
And there's no doubt about that. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is what happens immediately after that, both on the government side, regarding policies to be actuated and implemented, and also the many nights of very long knives that will follow within the Tory opposition, if it is the official opposition. But allow me to just briefly to say, as an outsider, that I wish this election campaign focused more on the great British conundrum, as I see it. This is a very rich country with poor people, low productivity, low wages, deficits everywhere, budget deficit, trade deficit, deficits galore, in a very rich country. I think you should just be concentrating on this. I hear people talking about wealth creation.
Well, it's Labour. That's the forefront of their campaign.
Yes, but with no substance whatsoever. There are so few real differences. But don't be so happy, because the point I'm going to make is that there are so few real differences between the manifesto of the Conservative Party.
Well, we did a whole segment on Lisa Nandy yesterday, which she uploaded this morning, Octomimic. Pretty awful stuff, really.
And the Labour Party, from a macroeconomic point of view,
Right.
there is no plan for massive green investment, for instance, in this country by anyone.
Right. Well, we're going to look at the economy in more detail in terms of the prospectus being put forward by Labour. Timandra, what do you make broadly of the psychology that Francis was referring to of Grant Shapps, painting the Tories as the underdogs? We've heard Rishi Sunak saying, don't hand Labour a blank cheque. We had on this programme sitting just where Mims was, Geoffrey Cox, the former Attorney General, don't allow Britain to sleepwalk into a one-party socialist state. Does it work?
Well, I don't know, but it's interesting if you look at the digital campaigning so far. That has been one of the strong messages from the Conservatives from the start. Almost the only consistent, coherent message through the digital platforms, which is obviously the main way the parties campaign these days, is less about, yes, no, come on, we can still win this, and more about just try and limit the size of Labour's majority. And the blank cheque.
Have you done GMB with Balls somehow allowed to interview Ashcroft? I mean, I've not done it, but I did watch it, and I'm just same old, just ignoring the questions, saying there's no money left, we have to starve children, like, just make sure you're voting Green and sit in Leicester South.
Thing obviously has a double meaning of, oh, well, you know, you're handing over your money through taxes, because that's another key part of their campaign, and also there will be no opposition within Parliament.
Effective?
I don't know. It's very hard to tell. I think the discouragement point is quite interesting. The don't bother to turn out and vote because it's all in the bag. There's very little evidence that digital campaigning really sways people in any kind of mysterious, magical way. But the one thing it has been shown to sometimes be effective at is to actually discourage turnout. So not so much the persuasion.
Worth pointing out, Kevin, that there wasn't like a direct accusation between Nandi and Bird, but there was just a very, very heavy implication given the context of what was being said. It was incredibly heavily implied, in my opinion, but there wasn't actually a direct accusation.
But the mobilising, you can demobilise people.
Could we just talk very briefly with you, Yanis, about this story, because it has been released today in BBC News. Greek Coast Guard threw migrants overboard to their deaths, witnesses say. Now, this is a BBC analysis that has found over a 3-year period that more than 40 people are alleged to have died as a result of being forced out of Greek territorial waters or taken back out to sea after reaching Greek islands. Now, the Greek Coast Guard has told the BBC investigation it strongly rejects all accusations of illegal activities. What's your reaction to this?
Well, I've raised this issue in Greece's parliament on a number of occasions. We had lots of evidence, some of which the BBC reporters used. I feel ashamed as a Greek citizen.
Yeah, like if I was in Joe Bird's position, I would have been absolutely furious. I've been fuming. I would have stopped, if I was Joe, right, I would have stopped the conversation immediately and just said, do you think I'm anti-Semite? Yes or no? Stop, like, I'm filibustering this whole debate, this whole discussion, until you answer very specifically, do you think I am an anti-Semite or not? Otherwise, it's all just left an implication, right?
As a European, for what the Greek government, the Greek Coast Guard, and Frontex, the European Union, is doing. These are crimes against large numbers of people that have gone unpunished. We have more than 5,000 cases of illegal pushbacks. But this is Europe, you see. This is what has happened with the rise of the ultra-right. A policy of increasing cruelty to brown people in order to appease a population whose discontent has nothing to do with migration or foreigners. It's got everything to do with 20 years of catastrophic mismanagement of Europe's economy.
Right. I mean, of course, you were part of one of those governments running an economy in Greece.
For 5.5 months.
For 5.5 months?
And I resigned because I was refusing to sign on the dotted line of all the policies.
Fair enough. I just thought I'd remind you that you were there for a brief period. Let's talk about the economy and particularly Labour's promises. Yes, wealth creation is very much at the heart of the campaign. They are
You watched me on Piers Morgan's show, As in, you watched me reacting to Piers Morgan.
We can see some live pictures here of Keir Starmer on a campaign, I think at a port on the south coast, but they're very much channeling Labour, that slogan you may remember from the 1992 American presidential campaign, "It's the economy, stupid." Now, Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, and her colleague, the Shadow Business Secretary, have been in the city earlier today, sipping orange juice with financiers. Is that the snapshot? Life under a Labour government, hanging out in the city, Francis?
I think what Rachel is announcing today is a national wealth fund that for sure will need to build over time, but is acknowledging exactly the point you made, that we've had 14 years of low to zero growth, low productivity, investment going off a cliff, and a cost of living crisis where working people are not getting their
But that just shows how difficult it is. What is a national wealth fund? Describe to me and to our viewers how that would work.
So it's an investment vehicle. The idea is to use every £1 of British government investment to attract in private investment.
How much private investment?
The idea is trying a target of £3 for every pound that the UK government puts in.
Right, but it's not guaranteed, is it, to attract that much private investment?
Well, Rachel is speaking to investors as we speak, and that's what that programme has been all about. There's an expert task force that's...
Yeah, literally, it's exactly what I said it was. It's just a de-risking method for capital investment. You get some level of share equity for the money that you spend from this money created by the state, but nothing more than that. That's all it is, this National Wealth Fund. A share equity programme for the state.
Going to advise on exactly how it's used, but the plans are clear. It's about creating good green jobs, reindustrialising Britain, and helping the communities that have been completely stuffed by this government and the closures of manufacturing, of traditional industries that we know have to transition to lower energy, carbon neutral jobs. That's what we want. Well-paid jobs, skilled jobs in the areas
everyone wants well-paid jobs and well-paid skilled jobs. It's whether this vehicle will actually work. When Labour is going to stop and scrap any further licences to oil and gas, for example, well, that'll be job losses.
It's precisely because we need to plan and manage that transition with a proper industrial strategy. But look at the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund.
Except that the Norwegians didn't waste their oil and gas for 30 years.
Exactly. So we should have done this decades ago, but we're doing it now.
Hang on, Francis.
And Norway has just taken a major stake in offshore wind farms, a Danish company, which is great. But why can't we do that?
Well, why can't we do that? Sorry, continue your point.
Well, okay, firstly, you create a national wealth fund when you've got wealth to put into it. Britain squandered its wealth from gas from the North Sea over many years. It squandered all the proceeds from privatization. Maybe those monies should have gone in. That's gone. Private funding can be crowded in, as you said, if the public investment goes in. But looking at the Labour manifesto 2024, there's simply no money there. What you have baked in there is substantial austerity. Look at the IFS, the
Institute for
It's going to have to scale up over time, for sure, and be more ambitious.
But I see nothing in the Labour plans that will create anything other than disinvestment. There is a propaganda talking about it's the economy stupid and wealth creation and so on, and then there are the facts on the ground inside the Labour manifesto. And I see nothing in there. For instance, they could have cut 5 billion of the super profits of the bankers by tiering the interest rates that the Treasury pays in the context of quantitative easing and quantitative tightening now. Rachel Reeves decided not to antagonize the bankers. So she's happy to put caps on children's benefit, but not on the super profits of the bankers.
Well, Francis, but
she's not doing anything about capital gains. I mean, why? What is the rationale for having a different rate for capital gains than income tax?
Well,
can we just bring it back to reality? Because in Bristol, there's been a green function, some kind of energy. But
yeah, Yanis is absolutely right. And again, specifically the reference to tiered interest on bank reserves. What Reform UK are planning to do, and we'll get to that later, is change the arrangement so you don't pay any interest on reserves held at the Bank of England because of quantitative easing, which of course means that no bank is getting a good rate for the Bank of England anymore, so can't offer a good rate on savings accounts. So that's a problem if they do it Reform's way. But a tiered structure like Yanis is doing would bring us in line with other European countries. We pay far too much in interest payments on gilts held by the Bank of England.
A company that went bust, that had to get bailed out. Birmingham Council, run by Labour, again went bust, had to get bailed out. Then you've got the same in Croydon. So you've got what Labour say.
I mean, Birmingham had to get bailed out because of equal pay claims, nothing to do with projects.
They'll do, and then how they overspend and things go wrong on a local level. And then you look at the blueprint, which is Wales, and saying that, you know, this is the future, and you can see longer waits, more challenges, and certainly not.
But Mims, what's wrong with a national wealth fund?
Well, I mean, I love the idea of it. You've got you've got to clear a lot of the bureaucracy. But if you hear from Labour, they want to cosy back up to the EU. You know, the new.
Well, hang on, we'll part that aside. But what's wrong?
That's the thing, right? Talk about North Sea oil and things like that. It's with Norway, because they had state ownership of their oil drilling company, which is called Equinor now. It's called Statoil before it rechanged its name. When it has its share. The share equity that the state of Norway has in Equinor is 67%, 66%, which is, you know, a majority shareholder. So the state gets to direct how it functions and gets the vast majority of the proceeds. Whereas Labour's plan is for 25% share ownership, which is a very small amount in terms of how much they're going to be getting out of that in investment. In payout, rather, as far as the proceeds go. And they don't have majority share ownership in terms of the decisions and board appointments and things like that. So it really is very weak source in comparison to the Norwegians.
Wrong with the sovereign wealth fund? I take Yanis's point that there isn't much wealth around to put in there, but they're pledging £7.3 billion, and they want 3 times as much private investment for every pound of that.
But then they're also arguing the private investment that comes into water companies and rail companies and others, they don't want. So this is...
What investment ever went into water in this country? This is a scandal what your government has been doing for decades. You should be hanging your head in shame as a result. Talking about investment, you have given away your water boards to companies that have defrauded the people of Britain with your political backing, at least now that you're facing an Armageddon in the polls and in the polling stations. You know, just admit that it was a crime against logic what you've done with water companies.
Mims?
I think
True. I mean, literally, again, just anybody who knows how markets work, natural monopolies, inelastic markets, these were terrible things to marketize. You cannot marketize a natural monopoly. You cannot privatize a natural monopoly. You should not marketize a natural monopoly. It's very, very simple logic. People cannot choose which water provider they have, meaning there is no competition to drive down prices. There is a reason why Michael Burry, the trader who predicted the global financial crisis and made bank off the back of it, betting against the housing market, there's a reason why he is now investing specifically in water, because it's the one thing that humans cannot do without. It is the ultimate inelastic commodity in terms of demand. And we have allowed, especially in this country, the private sector to monopolize it, to make money off of this thing that everybody needs. And of course, they have no mechanism to hold them to account, because there's no mechanism with which that we can change our consumption based upon supply. It's crazy, absolutely, it's lunacy that it was privatised in the first place. Aaron Bastani was right. He's describing it as the greatest legalised theft in this country. And it is a scandal, as Yanis calls it, 100%.
You just need to Google The Guardian under the Labour government and you'll see condoms on the beach and tampons on the beach.
But answer the actual question about what has happened in terms of the public return on water companies.
Well, the reality is, obviously there's a challenge here, and we know
There's no challenge.
about...
There's just loot.
Let her answer.
They looted the water companies.
Ultimately, the queue for investment, and we've just talked about the Green Wealth Fund or the Sovereign Wealth Fund that Labour may come forward with. Water companies and other people will be in the queue for all of that investment. And ultimately, under us, we are monitoring the water. We know what's going on. We've got the biggest...
There are reports of sewage in all of our waterways.
The biggest act of Parliament in the last government.
And again, why are we having to legislate this? If it was just under democratic control, it would be democratically accountable. The water boards are much cleaner than we have now. Margaret Thatcher made the explicit decision in her acts of Parliament that she did that stopped the regional water boards in using private capital to be able to invest in infrastructure investment, deliberately kneecapped the public water boards. And then when new EU regulations on water quality came in, they could not afford to do the necessary infrastructure investment to be able to get themselves up to standard, thereby creating the situation where privatisation was justified to make sure that they met those new EU standards. It was a deliberate plot. It was a con deliberately done to be able to flog off the family silver, in the words of Harold Macmillan, to people who had no interest in the public good, no interest in social utility. The only interest that they had was profit, and they can profit as much as they want because we literally have nowhere else to go because it's a natural monopoly and an inelastic market. That's exactly what's happened here. And you saying, oh, we've got investment down. You shouldn't have to legislate the basic function of something like a water company. You should have to legislate for them not to put poo in the river. This isn't difficult, Mims.
Has been the Environment Act with the plan for water and the monitoring. None of it was done under the Lib Dem water minister. None of it done under the previous government.
All right,
so it's right that it's being tackled. No one on this panel would disagree. We have a plan.
Well, before I come to Timandra, answer Yanis's question about what is the rationale for not equalising capital gains tax with income tax?
I have huge sympathy for that argument because I think the problem in this country is that we've been taxing work and not taxing wealth. And that when it comes to the Conservative Party's unfunded manifesto promises, of course, those tax cuts that they're promising will disproportionately help the wealthy. And that's what they're not being honest about.
Right, but you're still not being clear about capital gains tax. You're sympathetic to it, but it's not. It is or it isn't going to happen during a Labour government.
Well, I think Labour's been very clear on the tax front. What you see is what you get in the manifesto.
Well, yeah, exactly. They're very clear that they want to tax capital gains. They're very clear about it because they have explicitly said we will not end the two-child benefit cap because we haven't got enough tax to fund it. And that's not something that's being done out of necessity. That's a political choice. They could tomorrow say, actually, our manifesto is wrong. We are going to have a tax on capital gains to equalise with income tax, to raise billions of pounds. And a very small proportion of that we could use to end the two-child benefit cap, to take 500,000 children out of poverty. And they are choosing not to do this political choice. You say, oh, I'm sympathetic with that argument. Okay, well, then do it, right? You're a Labour lord now. You're not president of the TUC anymore. You don't have a remit to the trade unions. You're a Labour lord. You're a legislator for the presumed governing party in 3 weeks' time. Have a position. Don't just say you're sympathetic.
But for myself, I think we have to look in this country. If we're going to tackle poverty and inequality, then, working families should get a fair shot. And at the moment, they're being bashed far harder than the wealthy.
Let me just show you.
17 different taxes still up for grabs to go up, including council tax. And we are the party, and Labour sat on their hands and did not vote.
But of course,
to
as you
reduce
know, Mims, that the tax burden has gone up to its highest levels under Conservatives.
Because the help and support has gone up to its highest
The difference between Labour and the Conservatives is that Labour has been clear about the principle. We will not raise the tax burden on ordinary working people.
Yes,
that is
although a lot of your support.
But you are raising the tax burden on ordinary working people. You are committing to keep the Conservative plans for fiscal drag for 3 years. Fiscal drag is a real terms tax increase for people on low incomes, for ordinary working people. And we know that it is, because this is why the tax burden is set to increase over the next 3 years, despite these national insurance cuts the Conservatives are pretending that they have the money for.
Or do you think you should? Let's have a look at this in the Mirror. Pledge to Forgotten Britain, just the job. There is Rachel Reeves laying out this plan to try and regenerate former industrial heartlands, trying to sell this idea of a sovereign wealth fund with £7.3 billion of state investment. Do you think it's the right ambition?
What, to create skilled, high-paid jobs?
Well, via a sovereign wealth fund. As I said, everyone wants those.
I am very struck by, like, when you raise the idea of the Norwegian sovereign funds, they did that by exploiting their oil and gas reserves, and yet we're now proposing to close down the oil and gas reserves.
Not pledging. Well, certainly on the oil and gas licences.
And one of the key...
Look, there's barely any of it left, right? You know, I have my criticisms of Labour's plans here. But if we want to create a sovereign wealth fund, if we want to have investments that's going to generate returns for the government, again, I would want to have a much larger share of the companies, but whatever, that's a teething issue. If we want to have a sovereign wealth fund, we want to have something that's going to generate returns for a very, very long time. The idea that we would get returns on oil and gas when they're projected to run out in my lifetime seems like a really short-sighted way of investing the state money, when we could just wind these things down. And this is just from an economic perspective. This isn't even talking about the climate change issues with continuing our oil and gas exploitation. Now, I think there are some reasonable arguments about how we do the transition fairly to take people with us and not cost jobs, right? Plenty of reasons to be careful about doing this. But the idea that we should just explore loads of new oil and gas fields just for a short-term boost to a sovereign wealth fund is like shockingly poor short-term thinking. But then again, I guess a bunch of these boomer journalists aren't going to have to bother caring about the longevity of these plans for the future.
Key things that I keep hearing by people who are trying to run businesses here that fail, especially in things like industry, is that the energy is too expensive here, and that what makes it impossible to make the businesses profitable is that the energy is too expensive. So for me, if you actually wanted to have an industrial strategy and bust the stagnant productivity that we were talking about before, one of the things you need to do is sort out infrastructure and have clean energy and deliver services like a postal service and water and all the things that...
Well, yeah, all of these things that should never have been privatised and have been privatised and now suck. Yes, I agree, Tamandra. We should never have privatised water or indeed the Royal Mail.
Somehow we can't actually deliver anymore. I personally, I don't really care that much whether it's public or private, but somebody needs to do those things. And most of them...
By I don't care whether it's public or private, what they really mean is we realised privatisation has failed. We know that privatisation has failed. We can see it all around us. We can see the failure of privatisation every time we interact with any of these services. But I can't look like too much of a lefty, so I can't advocate something like nationalisation, because that makes you a Corbyn jam man person. Like,
them are not happening at the moment. So to say, oh, we're going to start a sovereign wealth fund,
literally a communist.
National, whatever, a British wealth fund, and we're going to attract investment, like, well, fine, but if people can't make businesses that are profitable and grow the economy, then what is this money going to go into?
Well, I mean, it's literally investing in green energy to bring those bills down to make businesses profitable. Again, I have my problems, but the base idea of taking state money and investing that in the supply side of energy, that's literally how you bring bills down. So we don't have to rely on wholesale oil and gas prices elsewhere.
Exactly. In Wales, no commitment to welfare, no commitment to the nuclear sector there. The community
Well, no, but there's been no commitment to the nuclear sector in the rest of the UK either.
This is
20 years ago, Nick Clegg said, what's the point of building it?
This is the clean steel, gigafactories, renewable energies, innovation.
It's how you get there. It's how you get there on delivery.
But you need investment.
And the gigafactories
But we're missing the point on energy.
Go on.
On British energy, we're missing the point. You have one of the, great examples of green energy across Europe. It's not a problem about infrastructure in the United Kingdom. It's not a question of high costs. You have very low costs and you produce massive quantities of wind power. And you do not rely on imported energy. The problem is you have
not as much as some other countries.
No, hang on a second. The point I'm making is this. you have this market fundamentalism which is linking the price that you're paying for your electricity, not to the cost, but to what the private corporation, some of which of course are nationalized French, right, are getting by selling it outside of Britain. So when you create this false quasi-market, you may have kilowatt hours that are produced at minimal cost and you pay for it as if it has been produced by the most expensive imported LNG. Now that is a design problem, it's a political problem. Some people are making a lot of money out of a very high price cost margin. So it's not a problem of having too high costs. But you have too high prices which benefit the owners of these companies.
But what are you going to do about that?
And imagine, and things, you can't fix this with this public-private model unless you massively revamp how we work our grid. Again, which you'd also have to nationalise. This is literally why we want to have a fully state-owned energy, because then we're not paying stupid high prices. And even if we are paying stupid high prices, even if you didn't change the way we've marketised our energy system, you would still be paying that money in high bills to a government that can then give you public services in return, or fund your councils in return, or give you healthcare in return. Sure, some of that payment would go to the obscene profits of the energy companies, but you would still be getting something back because you'd be paying money to a state that then gives you public services as part of that payment.
There are big issues about the grid in Britain that does need
there's no
updating
investment
and so on.
that, but not on the cost of producing
electricity. It's not just an investment vehicle, it's about potentially having stakes in companies that will.
So you're picking winners. You're going to be picking winners. The state's going to be deciding which sort of investments and companies.
The state already.
We're going to have a proper industrial strategy, which we haven't had in this country for so many years.
Let me just pick up on something.
You chose to give it to EDF. Your government, not personally.
I didn't.
Yeah,
but
this state decided to nationalise the privatised electricity generation with their own nation.
Can I just pick up on that?
British electricity.
Yeah, well,
that was a decision by your state. It wasn't a market-derived
But
kind
Yanis,
of outcome.
is it, to Mandra's point, do people really care who's providing it? Whether it's private,
they care
whether
about,
it's public?
Yes,
I mean, maybe, yes, some people...
Well, yeah, they care about the price, and it's more expensive if it's from the private sector. It's really simple. It's really simple.
People do.
But in that case... It's not an ideological point. Because if the person who is providing electricity for you has cornered the market with the help of the government and is charging you an arm and a leg for it, yes, you care who is providing
Right, well, let me show you then.
Yeah, again, inelastic market, they are allowed to corner it because it is indeed a level of inelastic demand.
When it comes to health, because Labour is proposing more private sector involvement, more outsourcing to get rid of the backlog, they say, obviously, has been built up under the Conservatives, yet partly from the pandemic. Manifesto, not the sum total of spending on NHS, says Treaty. Now, this has been seen as an admission that more will be spent on the NHS. Do you admit more will have to be spent on the NHS, first of all, and through using private sector involvement?
What I understand from Wes Streeting is that there is going to be a temporary use of the private sector to clear some of the backlog, some of the waiting lists. I mean, if you know anybody who's been waiting for a hip operation in pain, then it's, frankly, they've usually been waiting months.
So you're relaxed about private sector involvement?
I think it's, personally, I'm very conscious that it's the NHS we have to invest in. Ultimately, it's the NHS on which our futures rely. And I worry about distracting money from that. But I can also understand, knowing people who are in pain, waiting for operations, why you might want to use any surplus supply in the private sector temporarily.
Right, but that would be something you would welcome. Use the spare capacity, if there is spare capacity in the private sector, to get rid of the backlog.
I think Wes calls it...
Spoiler alert, there is not spare capacity in the private sector. We've said it 1,000 times already, but just in case it's the first time you've watched my channel, right, there is no spare capacity in the private sector. The vast majority of both the staff and the facilities are owned by the NHS and used on a contractual basis by the private sector. There is no spare capacity, at the very least not something that would bring down waiting lists by the amount that Wes Streeting is claiming that they can do. You'd have thought, right? You'd have thought if there was large spare capacity in the private sector for the government to use to bring down waiting lists, A, because it'd be good to get people actually seen for their treatment, and second of all, for political reasons, because the Tories are massively behind in the polls and the NHS waiting lists are a problem. that's causing this drop in the polling numbers, you'd think they would have done it already, right? You think the Tories who love the private sector, if there was this spare capacity, would have just spent the money already to ensure this gets done. There's a reason why the Tories haven't used the private sector to bring down the NHS waiting lists already, and that's because it's bollocks. It doesn't exist. It's not true. Simple as that.
The independent sector, to avoid the word private sector in there. Look, it's absolutely crucial that we get people the help and support they need, given the backlog and challenges. And I know from my own constituents...
The Prime Minister admits you haven't done well enough.
Well, from my own...
In Australia, literally 30% of homes have rooftop solar that feeds back into the grid, and that reduces demand. That means we look at your energy bills, even though we are paying good amount for ageing, crumbling coal power plants and wind's hard, eye-watering power bills over here. I mean, yeah, absolutely, yeah, our water bills, our power bills are really, really high. And the thing as well, I actually talk that Australia is actually, despite all of the Clive Palmer lobbying and all of the Liberal Party kind of corruption in the background with regards to the subsidy that they give the fossil fuel industry and the pretty environmentally damaging mining industry and stuff like that. At the very least, you have a really, really positive story of green energy in Australia, which is HydroTas. So for people who don't know, HydroTas is the state-owned energy production company for hydroelectricity in the state of Tasmania in Australia. HydroTas produces so much electricity at such a cheap price, entirely renewable sources, because it's hydroelectricity, that the federal government of Australia forces HydroTas to sell its spare energy at a loss back to mainland federal Australia to try and subsidise the fact that they haven't built enough clean power over there either. HydroTas is absolutely like the biggest kind of renewable energy success story, especially of that side of the world. And you look at other renewable energy, like Norway gets most of its electricity specifically from hydroelectricity coming down from the fjords. They take their oil wealth and they sell it to other people to pay for pensions, whilst getting their own energy locally on their own hydroelectricity for power.
Constituents, when I was the MP, it was very much improved picture, and thank you to my local NHS who've been doing everything they can to make a difference. But if you want a blueprint of how the NHS is run, just go to Wales.
Yes, I've heard.
But that's part of the United Kingdom. You've got people coming over the border.
You're comparing
to England.
apples and pears. The population of Wales
pain
is
within Wales
on
or
average,
England is not the
older,
same.
poorer, and there is more sickness. It's again, dealing with post-industrial areas where you've got people who are struggling. So it's unfair to keep bashing.
And I'm just going to interrupt and say there's a full list of candidates standing in your constituency on the BBC website. And while I am doing the public information bit, several important deadlines for the general election are coming up. The deadline to register to vote is midnight.
That was pretty sick by Yanis. Enjoyed that. Yeah, and also, I thought it was 25% less funding per capita tomorrow night. Last time somebody pointed out in chat. If you dam a puddle in Tasmania, you're already producing more electricity than the entire population of Tasmania needs. Oh, yeah, I mean, you're 100% right, Alex. You're 100% right that, the Tasmania doesn't have particularly high energy needs. But that is a success story of public investment in, powerful renewable energy that lots of other governments would be able to replicate.
Tomorrow, the 18th of June. If you want to get a postal vote, you'll need to apply by 5 p.m. on Wednesday this week. And
also, if you're enjoying the content, you can subscribe on Twitch for $4.99 or for free with Twitch Prime by linking Amazon Prime account to your Twitch account. It gets you a free subscription every single month, which gets you access to ad-free viewing and my animation static emotes in Twitch chat. If you want to drop a message, 100 bits gets you text to speak on Twitch, which is something you can do if you want to message read out. If you want to message read out on YouTube, you can super chat. I read out all super chats regardless of value, as long as they're not rude. You can also become a member on YouTube. It's only 99p. is literally cheaper than a can of Red Stripe to become a member on YouTube, and gets you access to my archive live streams outside of the live streams that will be free to view for everyone during the election period, as well as my static emotes in YouTube chat and indeed in the YouTube comment section. So if you're going to comment on my YouTube videos, try and use my emotes so people know what benefits they can get with their membership. And last of all, if you're enjoying the content but you don't have a message you want read out, but you do want to help us out and keep the stream going on YouTube, the best way to support the channel is to gift memberships to your fellow viewers. So just like you get memberships at 99p, you can gift them at 99p each to your fellow viewers. That helps spread the love around, boost the stream in the algorithm, and give us extra emote slots. So there's even more available for membership tiers as everybody gets access to it.
If you need to apply for a proxy vote, the deadline is 5 p.m. next Wednesday, the 26th of June. All important dates for your diary. Now, today, Reform UK is launching what they call Our Contract with You in South Wales. We have Dr. David Bull, the deputy co-leader of the party in Westminster. Let's have a little look at this headline in the Telegraph just before we come to you, David. Election diary, Nigel Farage to launch Reform manifesto. You're holding this event in South Wales, as I said, where there is a Labour administration in power, as we've been hearing from Mims Davies. Are you now turning your guns on Labour?
Yeah, very much so, yes. We are holding it there because Wales actually gets more money per capita than the rest of the United Kingdom, certainly in England. And
England, not the rest of the United Kingdom.
But let's just look at the situation in Wales. Of course, educational attainment is terrible in Wales. It's at the bottom of the league table when it comes to educational attainment.
And what's your policy? What's your policy on education, David?
So let me just finish. So also the health service is falling apart in Wales, and this is the whole point. That the reason we're going there is because this is a very deprived community. Labour has been in charge for many years, and it just proves how catastrophic it is when Labour is in charge. So
I mean, if you want to try and blame Labour for the left behind communities in Wales, you can't really blame Mark Drakeford, really, can you? Given that he's been somebody who's been calling out the lack of investment into their communities in terms of the structure of our economy for the entirety of the time that Labour have been in charge of Wales. If you wanted to blame Labour for things like post-industrial communities being left behind, you can blame Blair, who did the deindustrialisation alongside Thatcher. But then again, you are also Thatcherites. You also believe in laissez-faire economics, which is why the lack of industrial strategy, as has already been pointed out today, left these industrial communities behind to rot. That is literally an artifact of the kind of macroeconomic policy that is advocated for by Reform UK. You're not promising investment or levelling up or new industries in these communities because you don't think that the government should be engaging with the market because you believe in free market economics. I don't believe that, and neither does Labour. They just not have the tools to do so because the restrictions in reindustrialisation have come from the fact that the Conservative government has been in power in Westminster for 14 bloody years. So obviously Blair did nothing because he was the part of the problem, and there's been no solutions because the people who have been in charge for all this time are also Thatcherites who also don't believe in reindustrialisation. That is exactly the same ideology between Reform UK and the Conservative Party. Anybody who thinks that Reform UK are different from the Tories is absolutely fucking demented. It's completely delusional.
And I'm delighted to show this. This is our contract with you. This is what we're announcing in 20 minutes' time. It's bold, it's radical. We published it in draft form on our website. We've had feedback from the public. We've had feedback from experts, and this is the final version. And we're really pleased with it.
I'm sure you are. You're pledging to increase the minimum income tax threshold from just over 12,500 to 20,000, and raise the higher rate threshold from 50,000 to 70,000, as well as large cuts to stamp duty and inheritance tax. This reminds me of £45 billion of unfunded tax cuts put forward by Liz Truss, and we know what happened to that.
Well, Joe, also, if you read...
I mean, Dan Needle, who's somebody I have mixed relationships with, I think he's a bit of a briefcase, but whatever, like, I'm going to quote his analysis of this. which is that the numbers that they have given in terms of the way they want to generate revenue and how they want to cut spending in terms of their tax cuts has a £45 billion gap in it overall in their failures in accounting. And again, these aren't my numbers, these are just Dan Needle's. Take them with a pinch of salt. I'm not saying that he's some kind of savant who can't get anything wrong, but it does seem to me like even just on a macroeconomic level in terms of quote unquote balancing the budget to avoid a Liz Truss bond yields moment, they're clearly barking up the wrong tree. It is really absolutely like Liz Truss going completely mad. Like 2 times Liz Truss is what Dan Needle referred to it as. And even on top of that, remember yesterday, I specifically talked about this idea of giving poor people a small tax cut and rich people a big tax cut. So poor people are relatively worse off in comparison, but they feel like they should be better off because they have slightly more money, even though their access to resources has been lessened overall because of money being a distributive token. This is what they're doing. I said they had already announced cuts to corporation tax, which would only affect like the wealthiest because smaller companies already pay a lower amount of corporation tax, 19% instead of 25%. If they're going to be slashing stamp duty and they're also going to be slashing inheritance tax, those are 2 taxes that also predominantly affect the wealthy. Again, very small tax cut for poor people, or here's, extra 25 quid a week or whatever. But all of these mega corporations, we're going to be taking 10% off of your corporation tax, which would cost billions of pounds a year to administer, for basically little to no gain, because the people benefiting would be already rich people, asset owners, and people with gigantic fortunes passing it down to their kids who've done nothing to deserve it. It is very Millet-esque. Yeah, it's absolutely very Javier Millet-esque. And it's also going to make poor people more poor. And it's going to make richer people more rich, and it's going to exacerbate the problem that Gary Stevenson talks about all the time, which is the level to which the rich people have more access to assets. All of the extra liquidity that they are going to give rich people in terms of corporation tax cuts and inheritance tax cuts is going to be pumped into asset prices to make them even more unaffordable for working class people, and they'll make them even harder to get on the housing ladder, for example. Like, this is a con. It's an absolute con that they're doing here.
Our contract with the people, you'll see the costings, which are in the final pages of this. We've had 2 former deputy governors of the Bank of England looking at particularly the QE side of it and how much money we think we can save there. The costings are around £140 billion, and we can prove where we get that money. Look,
but hang on,
yeah.
David. Let's just slow down a moment. The cuts will cost a total, we calculate, of £50 billion, and you're going to get this from cutting government waste.
Yes, indeed. So that's part of it.
Where are you going to find £50 billion worth of government waste that hasn't already been found, located and scrapped by the Conservatives?
Are you saying the government machinery is lean and mean? Because I don't think it is.
It absolutely is. We have one of the least managed healthcare services in the world. We have an incredibly efficient healthcare service outside of the money that we spend in privatisation. Obviously, private contractors, we have to pay their dividends. We have to pay the profit they make off of the top of the contract, right? That is inefficiency in terms of money that we spend. But these people want more privatisation, not less, in the healthcare service. So that one avenue for them to make efficiency savings isn't available to them. Outside of that, the idea that we can make the rest of our public sector more efficient is just nonsensical. Again, if it could have been done, do you not think it would have been done by George Osborne already when they went on their cutting spree for 6 years, like absolutely hacking apart our public sector, saying they were finding efficiency savings, but there were none there. So all it led to was a drop in service provision. Do you think you're going to find something that George Osborne couldn't find? This is madness. Then what they'll do is they'll say things like, oh, well, the NHS has loads of people doing DEI assessments. And I'm just like, A, these are there so that they can avoid things like lawsuits, for example. And second of all, that's like, £50 million worth of total DEI payments to staff for the whole of the United Kingdom. It's like 0.00002% of the NHS budget they would save by this one piece of inefficiency that everyone keeps bringing up every time. Oh, well, the NHS has people who have to deal with the equalities law. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, this is not a substantial part of inefficiencies in the NHS budget. Shut up, it's just not true. You're just absorbing propaganda that you've fucking been spoon-fed to by Richard Tice's Sunday sermon on GB News like he's a fucking vicar.
Have to find those savings. We've got an inflated civil service, we've got an inflated government departments, and actually we're having a conversation with the public here. We are calling this the immigration election. Everything is underpinned by that. 2.5 million people have come here in the last 2 years. Our services can't cope. You know I'm a doctor. We can't see a GP. We've got massive problems in the health service, in education. We can't build enough houses.
Okay, and you want to cut from these people? You want to cut £50 billion from the public sector, of which that is going to be about 5% cut to every single government department? Do you think we're going to get better education or better health service by you taking money out of public budgets? This is crazy stuff. Again, they are literally trying to promise the whole fucking world, guys. We will take money out of our public sector, but we'll also give you more at the same time. It's ridiculous.
And that is what people are saying to us on the doorstep.
I know, David.
They
it's
want
very good
change.
to come up. It's very good to come up with the critique of where we are now. I want to look at your supposed solutions to it. You mentioned immigration. Just very briefly, we have Yanis Varoufakis here in the studio. You may have seen the story by BBC Analysis on what happened in Greece over the last 3 years. Is the Reform Party still in favour of pushbacks in the middle of the channel?
We are. So there are two sides
Really?
to this, of course. Yes, absolutely.
Right. Well, let me just before you answer, just to say that, of course, BBC Analysis has shown that actually that has resulted in Greece's territorial waters in 40 or so people drowning as a result. They deny it, the Greek Coast Guard, but as a result of pushbacks. And that's a policy you want to pursue.
Look, no one should die as a result of...
But they will. They will. They will die, and you will have killed them if you engage in the plan that the Greeks are doing. It's as simple as that. It's your choice. It's your choice.
Having tough border control. The whole point about this is we declare a national security threat. We turn the boats back. We do that in a very humane way, make sure that people get back safely to the country that they came from. But we also, at the same time, we need to open safe and legal routes. We want offshore processing as well. The people who need our help, of course.
Excuse me? I'm speechless. I'm absolutely speechless. First off, we get Labour outflanked from the left by Nigel Farage on the two-child benefit gap. Now, Labour getting outflanked by the left on safe and legal routes. What the hell is going on? What's happening? He said safe and legal routes. It's the first politician outside of the Green Party who've said this.
Of course they can come to this country. But at the end of the day, we have to send out a very strong message. You cannot just get on a boat and come to this country. That is not acceptable.
David...
I mean, because again, like, if you want to stop the boats, you open the safe and legal routes, and people won't need to travel by boat. It's literally like the panacea that solves the problem. And I don't think they want to be publicly condemned for things like being the cause of deaths in the Channel. So yeah, we want to stop the boats by making sure they're... Yeah, wow, okay, fair enough. Next up, we wanted to nationalise energy and water. There is literally a plan in the manifesto about joint state and pension fund ownership of critical infrastructure. They've not said what's going to be included or how much it's going to cost, though.
On the NHS, Nigel Farage, and in fact we can see the stage to the side of our screens here being set up for him to take to the lectern. He's called for a French-style social insurance system for the NHS, which
Or he's also been in the Lib Dem manifesto, OK.
Will replace the free at the point of use model that we have at the moment with one where you would pay up front and claim back the money later, in other words, like insurance. He argued in the BBC debate that the model by which we fund healthcare is wrong.
Well,
do voters understand that's what you're proposing?
That is not actually in our contract because I actually wrote the health policy.
Look, so it's changed.
Nigel,
it's changed.
No, it hasn't changed at all. Look, it's really important that care remains free at the point of need. I think I said this to you before. We spend £176 billion on our health service, 11.7% of GDP. Our outcomes are terrible. 380,000 people didn't start cancer treatment in time.
Yeah,
in
but
the
David, are you proposing a
French-style
insurance system or not?
No, we're not at this stage. What we are saying is the model is broken, that the money needs to follow the patient. I also agree that we need to actually expand the private sector to help to sort out the backlogs. But let me make it really clear as well. We want to actually help people who work in health and social care as well. We want them to pay zero.
That's the thing, right, is that they'll say things like, we want to use the capacity of the private sector to bring down waiting lists. And what I can do now is I can say, that's the same as the Labour Party's policy. That's what Wes Streeting wants to do. And Reform voters will go, no, Reform are nothing like Labour. And Labour voters will go, no, Labour is nothing like Reform. And I'm just be sitting here going, they're both right-wing. Like, they both want privatisation of the health service. It's up to you if you want to vote for more privatisation of the health service, because the blue team, the cyan team and the red team are all offering it. If you want to renationalise our healthcare service, you've got one choice for yourself. One choice. At least in England anyway, and that's the Green Party.
David, you're galloping through all this. I can't actually keep up with everything that you're saying.
Well,
so you're not going to introduce. You're not going to introduce a French-style social insurance system. You're going to keep the model as it is here.
So the model remains the same, so that the money follows the patient. We think that it's
Well,
a
Nigel,
role for the private sector.
You better tell Nigel Farage, because he's about to take to the stage to announce a French-style social insurance system.
Nigel made a really good point, which is actually we need to look at the model. It doesn't work, and we need to come up with new solutions.
All right,
but ultimately, people shouldn't be waiting for treatment.
No, well, I think everyone can agree with that. Just stay with us. Mims, I'm just going to show you the election poll tracker, because, of course, as you know, last week there was one poll that...
That was a very funny one. A very funny little segment there. Very weird. Such a weird platform Reform is standing on. We will get to the manifesto in a second, don't you worry.
Showed that Reform had overtaken the Conservatives. But if we look at the BBC's general election voting intention, what we call the BBC poll tracker, it's 6 points behind, but still only 6 points. It's a party on the rise, isn't it?
Well, I do think the point about Reform, we should remind everyone, is not everybody who was a Conservative votes Reform. They do have an appeal to a certain voter. So I think that, you know, it's certainly something that's been coming up from Labour, that they're hearing this equally on the doorsteps.
But Labour, of course, are 20 points ahead in the polls of you, and that makes them 26 points ahead of Reform.
Look, I can understand the appeal, and David's made some appealing lines there. Some of them may be less attractive than others for some of those voters. But ultimately, they are the Labour enablers. Local voices will be lost in terms of the local community that you can rely on, who have...
I mean, they're Labour enablers because you fucking failed, mate. I'm sorry, Miriam, but I'm not going to call you fucking Mims. Whatever. Either way, like, they're not Labour enablers. You failed to appeal to your own voter base. You failed to engage in the policies of your manifesto that you ran on, that people believed in. 14 years, for example, they say, at Reform UK, they say they want this to be an immigration election. And there's a reason why they want it to be an immigration election, is because they know that the one policy that Conservatives promised every single time, in every manifesto for 14 years, was to reduce immigration. And it went up every single bloody time. Every single time it went up, right? I think immigration is a good thing. I think we need more immigration. I think our economy will get destroyed if we have net zero immigration because of how screwed up our population pyramid is. We'd have to have a massively increased retirement age in this country if we didn't have immigration. But that's my opinion. It's not indeed the opinion of most Conservative voters. They have to care about the pension age going up because they're already retired. What they do care about is, you know, cultural reasons for disliking immigration, ones that I disagree with as well. And then you promised these people, you promised every single time to reduce immigration, and you did not do it. And you only have yourselves to blame. And you go, oh, well, they're enabling Labour by splitting the vote. But tough, you shouldn't fucking fail on your single big manifesto promise every single time. Otherwise, you wouldn't split the vote. There's a reason why people are deserting you in their droves. There's the reason why I'm deserting Labour. It's the reason I'm deserting Labour, because they continue to promise things that they then refuse to be able to cash the cheque on.
And I think we've got some real similarities here. We want lower taxes, we want lower immigration, we don't want people dying coming over to this
But you haven't delivered. You admit you haven't delivered on those. I mean, David's shaking his head.
It's been very difficult when the Labour Party has been voting against the Rwanda bill in both the Lords. That's been very difficult. Yet apparently Keir Starmer's now keen on managing this. They're part of the changed Labour
well, they're
line.
interested in offshoring to a third country, not deporting.
Yes.
Can I just come back, though, on your point about reform being Labour enablers? That is all you are, isn't it, David Bull? A vote for you is a vote for Labour.
Absolutely not. I mean, look, the Conservatives have had 14 years. They're talking the same great game and deliver absolutely nothing. What I can tell you, you mentioned the YouGov poll. Every single party, apart from the Conservatives, have gone down. They stayed static. And we are rising. We're taking
that was one
votes.
poll.
It is one poll, but we're waiting for the next one. I think the next one's out at 5 o'clock today. But we're waiting for the next polls. But we are also taking votes from Labour. Keir Starmer is not a leader. He doesn't have any passion or drive, and that's what people are telling us on the doorsteps. And remember, I was an MEP in the Northwest, and these are Brexit-supporting communities, and they want radical change.
Well, right, just before I come... all right, you want to...
I mean, in the Northwest specifically, that's a very lefty area. I think if you spoke to most communities in the Northwest outside of like a couple of red wall constituencies, what they really want is nationalisation. They say they want it in basically every poll. They want better workers' rights, but they also want immigration going down. It's why Labour is massively ahead in all of the red wall constituencies. Like, the Reform UK electorate in these constituencies isn't like the majority of working age people in those constituencies. It's mostly retired people who don't have to care about reindustrialisation, who don't have to care about wages, who don't have to care about the cost of living, because they've had protected bumper pensions by successive Conservative and Labour governments. And so your promise of getting rid of the immigrants, really and truly, or stopping immigration, is the only real thing that appeals to them. Again, Reform UK is the only party in which the voters care more about immigration than other issues. Every other party, people more likely to care about the cost of living. And this, of course, is like an age disparity. Of course, there are plenty of poor pensioners, like in this country. We do have poor pensioners. There are a lot of them and they need help. But, a quarter of pensioners are millionaires who have, like, massive amounts of housing wealth and have been protected from the cost of living crisis by the triple lock. So there's a reason why boomers protected, having their pensions protected by the triple lock, don't care about the cost of living, because they don't have a cost of living crisis. But what they do have is a party that they voted for time and time again, year after year after year, election after election, who told them they would bring down immigration and never did. And they're going to vote for Reform UK, and they absolutely should do. They 100% should vote for Reform UK. Why the hell would they vote for the Conservative Party after everything? After everything! Why would they vote Tory? It makes no sense. It'll be like, again, the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Yeah, I agree, Ben.
Respond, Francis, and then I'll come to Jan.
Because I think reform needs to be taken on in terms of their policies. These are Donald Trump fanboys. And I think the cat was let out of the bag, because actually what they don't want is a French-style system. What they want is a US-style system of healthcare with an massive increase in the private sector. And, the NHS becomes dealing with the absolutely most severe cases. That's what you're after.
No, it is
and
not.
when it comes to £50 billion worth of tax cuts,
why don't you read the
tell us which public services you intend to slash. Be honest with working families and tell us the truth.
Let him answer. Which public services you would have to cut public services or spending on them dramatically, David, to get your £50 billion worth of government waste, as you call it?
We absolutely wouldn't. Well, if
benefits
actually,
for disabled people.
Well, I suggest you bother to read this before you comment on it. But in terms of the health service, it remains free at the point of need. It remains free at the point of need. The money follows the patient. The role of the private sector is really important, but we also want want to incentivise. I, as a doctor, know this. We have to incentivise health and social care staff. We'll do that by giving them tax breaks, and we'll underwrite their tuition fees if they stay in the NHS for 10 years.
Well,
that's a fair system.
Yanis Varoufakis, you lump...
I mean, I actually do agree with that policy. I do agree with the idea of having incentives for healthcare workers for them to stick around. But, you know, cutting their tax rate is just exactly the same as giving them extra money and pay. Like, doesn't make any difference to me either way. Either way, we are going to look at healthcare workers getting more pay and also incentivizing them to study, also a good thing. But then again, this costs money, and you could pay for that by raising taxes elsewhere. But they've not said where they're going to find the money.
Nigel Farage in with Viktor Orban, Donald Trump, Boris Johnson and Mussolini as anti-establishment voices that help the establishment. Are these populists selling out their voters? It was in an interview you did fairly recently with The Guardian. What is it that binds them all together?
What binds them all together is a combination of telling the people who suffer as a result of 20 years of austerity, we will look after you. And some of them do look after them, like Viktor Orban didn't treble the minimum pension. Mussolini introduced the pension, right? Together with, but at the same time, we demand from you total loyalty, no voice, no trades unions. You will give me all the power that I need in order to be a strong man, and a clear demarcation and a division of society between the wealthy white Christians and the brown people who will be pushed back. By the way, David, what you advocated there is that the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland violates international law on 2 counts. Yes, you did, David, and you're going to hear me out on this. Firstly, pushbacks are against the international law of the sea. If you don't know that, you're a doctor, you're not an international lawyer, check it out. And secondly, by denying people the right to seek asylum and treating them as illegal asylum seekers, you are violating every vestige of international law regarding refugees. But generally speaking, allow me just complete my sentence.
Yeah, but I must let David come
my great fear, you know what my great fear is? That the Tories are going to fade the way they're fading, and that if the Reform Party are smart enough, as smart as Meloni was or Orban was, that you may end up with a Labour Party that frustrates the expectations of the people who voted in. And then you're going to end up with an alliance between a rump of the Tory parties, the worst part, the most misanthropic part, with reform. And therefore you are going to end up with a situation like France today, where Le Pen threatens to take over government in France on behalf of white supremacists.
People in this country...
Get him. Mic drop. He's absolutely right, and we have said it on stream multiple times.
Are sick and tired of the 2 main parties. They are 2 sides of the same grubby coin. Go anywhere in this country and you will see the response we are receiving is extraordinary. And I'm waiting for increased poll ratings when we get the next poll. And just going back to your point, we are absolutely entitled to turn votes back under the UN Convention of 1951 and again in 1982. We absolutely are. And I made one other point.
No, you're not.
We want to want to open safe and legal routes for true asylum seekers, and there's nothing wrong with that.
How will you know that they're true asylum seekers if you don't let them come in?
Just briefly, before we move on, Tamandra, listening to this, how much of a threat or an appeal are Reform voters when it comes to Conservatives or Labour?
Although, to be fair, speaking of France, right, it might be happening. Nouveau Front Populaire have actually managed to cobble together an alliance, despite Mélenchon's insistence that he wants to throw away a bunch of agreements to tank the alliance, right? There is indeed the Nouveau Front Populaire that might be there to try and stop Le Pen. They're only 1 point behind in the polls. And of course, France is a runoff in between the top 2 even in general elections, even in parliamentary elections in France. You still have runoff elections. So, we're at the conundrum. We are at the turning point in history, chat, where the Liberals have to decide. They're 10 points behind the Nouveau Front Populaire. And of course, Le Pen's Rassemblement National as well. The Liberals must decide. Do they side with socialism or do they side with barbarism? That is the Liberals' choice. The Macron supporters' choice over in France is, do you support the socialists or do you support the barbarians in Marine Le Pen's Front National? You know full well, right? You know full well, chat, they're absolutely going to side with barbarism on this one. You know, right? They're gonna continue to support it. But, you know, we do have at least a chance. We do have a chance that the left might force out Le Pen. Like, left-wing unity and a broad front against fascism is what I've always been an advocate of popular fronts against fascism. Always. I always will be, have been and always will be. Despite how many times liberals and social democrats decide to belittle me and chastise me and hate on me for being a leftist, right? I will never say no to an alliance with these people to try and beat back fascism. It's just they never want it. They would rather have fascism than socialism because fascism doesn't threaten capital. It's as simple as that.
Labour thinking I'm not going to go for the mainstream parties.
Well, I think it's probably right to say that a lot of voters are disillusioned with both the major parties.
Alistair Campbell said Macron is an expert in triangulation. How will he lose, right? We did all of this appeasement of Marine Le Pen. We appraised Rassemblement National over and over and over again with policy. She described our policies as a win for the Rassemblement National. How can we possibly be losing? What could Macron have done wrong? It's an absolute mystery, isn't it? It's an absolute fucking mystery, innit, chat? What? They venerated and gave credence to all of the narratives and policies that Rassemblement National were running on, and they're winning loads of votes. Who could have thunk it? What an absolute turnout for the books, chat. Kel fucking surprise, mate.
And looking for something different. I mean, for me, I did have a quick look at the draft contract.
Well done.
And I had to take issue with my stats head on with the immigration part, because there's a lot of quotes of immigration figures of numbers coming in rather than net migration figures, so that inflates them somewhat. But leaving that aside, there are some other policies that I think will appeal to people, especially people who are small businesses or lower income families. I can see there are a lot of policies that will appeal. But I have to say, I think the left has to take some responsibility here, because the left has had many years to actually offer working people and low income families something that as a better alternative and some better vision of the future. And the left, as far as I can see, has failed. You look all across Europe.
2017 just never happened. Yeah, it just never happened. Again, yet another time where we're having a discussion on British politics, and at no point are we ever allowed to acknowledge that the 2017 election ever happened, where 40% of the country bought into a leftist vision of the future. 40% of the electorate voted for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party at the time, who were promising things like better housing in terms of actual massive council house building projects to get people housing security again from low income and working class families. Promising to rebuild our NHS and our crumbling public services. Inclusive ownership funds to give low-income workers a share in the businesses, a share in medium and large businesses in this country, so they can get proper returns on the overall net dividends paid out by these corporations to help them be able to live properly in this country with a good rate of pay, good returns on the labour that they do to be able to generate the wealth of society, right? But no, we haven't offered them anything at all. And again, the frustrating thing is that all of the journalists in this country, they seem to forget that there is this huge demographic of 25 to 40-year-olds who were, 20 to 30 during the Corbyn years, who have had nothing but austerity, who have known nothing but conservatism, who have known nothing but neoliberalism, who have known nothing but privatisation and failed public services, who bought in to Corbyn's plan for the future. We voted for Labour in our millions in this country in 2017 and of course 2019 as well, but that's less of a positive point in history for this movement. And we are usually poor, we're usually educated because we are the children of the Blair University boom. We usually live in cities, we usually rent, and we're usually very left-wing. And these journalists, because they don't live life in the real world, they're busy sharing fucking Prosecco with all of the bellends that they go to the Spectator garden party with. They don't recognise us as being an electoral demographic. We were the ones who bought into Jeremy Corbyn's policies in 2017 because we see the crumbling schools, because we don't send our kids to private school. All these journalist fuckos, they all send their kids to private school. They don't want us like a state school. They've got money for private healthcare. They don't have to deal with the NHS like we do. We bought into the left's vision in 2017. And you can come here to Mandra, right? As if that's a real name. As if that is your real name. It's Mandra. You can come here to Mandra and say that the left hasn't offered a vision. We bought into that vision. We bought into it. If Jeremy Corbyn ran on the same platform with the same percentage of the vote as what Keir Starmer is basically getting right now, he would sweep to power with a giant majority on current polling numbers. And we'd be able to create this social democratic, post-war consensus inclusive economy that everybody bought into. The people who blocked it, as every single analysis of election votes in 2017 shows, were older, non-working people and people on higher incomes. Those are the two groups of people who did not buy into this. This idea that Labour and the left haven't offered poor people a vision is just fundamental bollocks. It's absolutely fundamentally untrue. Completely untrue. How dare you? How dare you impugn us for having no vision? Crazy, crazy stuff. But again, why would these people, these journalist fuckers, ever have to bother thinking about what people younger than them might do or might or might not believe? Yeah, total revisionism, yeah.
Europe, and right-wing parties are coming to power. And what has the left offered ordinary people in Europe for some years? They've offered them green policies, which, as far as ordinary people can see, has tended to lower their standard of living. They've offered them a series of...
They've not lowered the standard of living. The country in Europe with the highest standard of living is Norway. And they have basically like almost all of their energy generated by clean power. One of the other richest countries in Europe is France. And France has almost all of its power generated by nuclear. What green policies have lowered standards of living? This woman is living in the fucking Twilight Zone. Like literal parallel universe shit. This person is a professional journalist, chat. She gets paid. She gets paid real, actual money for people to listen to her fucking opinions. What?
Of ideological things that, oh no, you should support this and you should support that, and very little tangible improvement in their lives and the lives of their children.
Well, it's time to come back to the Conservatives. We doubled the tax.
14 years.
We doubled the tax threshold to 13,000.
But I just want to be on these panels. I just want anybody under the age of 35 on any of these panels ever. Why? Honestly, like just get me on these fucking programs and I will KO these motherfuckers. Yeah, literal vibes. It's just vibes that she's talking about. Just vibes based. As if the green policies have happened at the same time as dropping living standards have happened and then doing correlation without causation. No, it's austerity, right? At least the EU countries, at least the countries in the EU can blame the ECB for constraining them on monetary policy, right? At least the European Union countries are hoodwinked and kneecapped by the Lisbon Treaty and the excessive deficit protocol. In the UK, we left the European Union. We don't have any of these monetary or fiscal locks on what we can or can't do in terms of expansionary budgets for investment to improve living standards. We inflicted austerity upon ourselves with no fucking reason. We literally inflicted austerity on ourselves, and we had it was a complete choice to do so. And that's why we have dropping living standards. It's not the green stuff. It's not investment in green energy. We've literally seen in this program already that the green energy plan is kneecapped by our failed neoliberal energy system and energy pricing system that Yanis Varoufakis already impugned the Conservative for like half an hour ago. What? Honestly losing my mind, having a mini meltdown here, chat. I know that you can all see me having the meltdown. You've all got eyes and ears. I'm clearly melting down in front of you. But honestly, the journalists in this fucking country, like there was a graphic that Ollie Dugmore tweeted out today from Politics Joe. showing the fifth most talked about source for media about politics discussion in this country on social media is Politics Joe, right? It's Politics Joe after, I think it's the BBC, ITV, Sky News and somebody else. It's Politics Joe that gets the most traction, most mentions on social media, mostly Twitter and mostly TikTok. And I'm like, yeah, of course they do. They are literally the only large-scale UK media source, especially on places like Facebook as well, that speaks to young people. And not even necessarily young people, millennials as a generation. People under the age of 42. We're the only people. Politics Joe is the only, outside of Gaius Novara, but they're a little bit less non-partisan. But like Politics Joe do things like, you know, broadcast select committees and gets young people interested in them. Yeah, of course they have monopolised where young people go for their politics takes, because nobody else not only talks to them or even understands our political views, our political opinions, or the kind of ideology or beliefs that we have. We have all of these private school 40 and 50-something journalists who all live in this ideological bubble, who all live on who all spend their time on Fleet Street, who all go to the Spectator garden parties, who all went to private school in Oxbridge to study PPE, for example, who all only go in their own little London bubble. They've not spoken to regular 35-year-olds, regular 32-year-olds, regular 29-year-olds about their political opinions or their political beliefs or their political ideology. They take everything. They still live, actually, most of these people still live in 1997. They still believe that we're still in like the Blairite world and they've not moved on. Why would they talk to us? None of us are in their high-level circles outside the private school children, who obviously have the same opinion as them because they went to fucking private school. Because none of us have upwardly mobile careers because our economy's been destroyed because of fucking austerity. Genuinely, the journalists in this country and their lack of understanding for young people makes me want to scream. Again, I'll go back to the point I made before, and I make it again. Throughout the entirety of the Corbyn period, they smeared us all as being politically naive, people being bribed by Corbynism. We didn't know what we were talking about. We were politically stupid, and we shouldn't be trusted with a large level of the vote. And that Corbyn was going to, essentially use us as collateral in his campaign to turn UK into a Marxist-Leninist state or some shit, right? When really and truly he just said, austerity is bad. Do you want to come and join our movement against austerity? And we all said yes. We all said yes. And in fact, we are far more politically astute than all of these journalist fuckers try to pretend that we are. And now all chance of progressive change has been cut out, has been ripped out of our society. All chance of progressive change is gone with the wind, and we're replaced by, like, the iron boot of Stalinism. Starmerism, even. Same thing. Right? And they're all wringing their hands going, oh no, when people think about opportunities for young people, what do the parties have for young people? Oh, isn't it such a sad reality that young people have no voice at all and they can't get on the housing ladder? We had a voice! We had a voice in 2017. For the many, not the few. That was the voice that we had. Politics Joe's tagline is politics for the many, not the few. And this is why young people vibe with their content, because literally nobody else in the journalist sphere, let alone speak to us, even treats us like political actors worth actually engaging with. And that's why Politics Joe are popular. And why I think Novara Media will be even more popular moving down the line as we become more mainstream. Corbyn is literally a democratic socialist, but a lot of the media journos who still live in the world where the Soviet Union still exists look at anybody to the left of Gerhard Schroeder and treats them like they're a Leninists. The worst part is that when Labour fail, it will make the left even more reviled, even though this Labour Party is just a slightly softer Tory party. Exactly. And that's why they'll turn to like the radicalism of Farage, offering real change in an area of stagnation.
We're lowering national insurance. We're focusing on self-employed. We're doing the things that if we weren't stuck in a pandemic or in this crisis because of the energy and the war, we would do. And that are our core
before the
principles.
pandemic.
Just read our manifesto. And I find
it definitely was before the pandemic. But Mims, just very briefly, because we've got to let David Bull go. Steve Brine, your colleague, said on this programme that Nigel Farage was a dangerous man, while Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary Secretary has called for him to be welcomed into the Tory fold. Who do you agree with?
Well, I've never met Nigel, but I have...
You must be one of the few people who haven't.
Well, funnily enough, I haven't, and I do frequent quite...
I mean, I have far more respect for Dr. David Bull than I have for anybody in the Conservative Party. At least Dr. David Bull has convictions and positions that he believes in, that he advocates for. I think they're all shit. I think they're all garbage, and I think they're all paid for opinions that to benefit a wealthy elite to try and foment a culture war and destroy this country from the inside politically, right? I believe that all of his policies are going to be terrible and destroy the country, but at least he believes in them. I understand the ideological underpinnings of why David believes what he believes, why he does what he does, and why he wants to have it as being part of the country's political sphere. The Conservative Party, just fucking kleptocrats. Just there taking money from the state, don't believe in anything, just say whatever they want to get elected. Like, you know, I have far more respect for Dr. David Bull when he actually believes what he says and says what he believes. Even if I think these are bellend, then I would never vote for his party, you know, come rain or shine.
quite a few pubs.
So should
they're
you...
great in my patch.
Yeah.
But look,
When
our
you...
party is one of the most successful, pragmatic...
And would you invite him into the fold? I mean, they're unlikely to win that many seats despite the poll rating because of the system that is underway. Would you welcome...
I think he might be busy trying to find £50 billion worth of cuts to public services.
OK. David Bull, thank you very much. We only have a few minutes left because, of course, we've gone over time for a change to talk about techno-feudalism, which I'm now going to ask you to explain in a minute or so. Yanis Varoufakis, what is it?
The moment you enter Amazon.com, you exit capitalism. You actually exit the market. Because think about it. Unlike a shopping mall, where you and I can walk together and look at shops, even if they're monopolized by very few firms, we can have a discussion about it. Say, we don't like this. We can have a consumer boycott if we are peeved by something that we see. The moment you enter Amazon.com, the algorithm belonging to somebody called Jeff Bezos in particular decides who you talk to, matches you to particular sellers through Alexa and various other interfaces. You train it to train you to train it to give you good advice about what to read, about what to buy. Then it wins your confidence, and then the next time it suggests something, you buy it. So it replaces advertisers, marketers. It has a dialectical relationship with you. And then once it has created this desire in your bosom that you want something, it sells it to you outside the market process and charges 40%, up to 40% to the capitalist, the traditional capitalist who actually produces it. And that money goes to the Cayman Islands via Ireland, Holland, Luxembourg, and various other...
And you're saying that countries like the UK should tax these companies for every sale they make?
I say a number of things. Firstly, that. We need a digital tax, a cloud tax, I call it. 40 countries have it. This is nothing new, spectacularly radical. But secondly, we need to gain public control of the algorithms.
All right, well, let me get to Tamandra,
because we've cannot be regulated technically.
But at the end of the day, I think, whilst I can understand people's misgivings with Yanis's theories here, but at the end of the day, right, most of platform capitalism is just rent. It's electronic economic rent, which is why I think the term feudalism makes sense, because you're not a producer. The capitalists are not producers anymore, they are rentiers. We have created a world, a global market of rentier economies with people who control platforms. And I think that is indeed it's just an extension of capitalism, but it is indeed, I think it's I think it's an analysis that has merit. Dropping magic cards on the floor here, chat. Well, absolutely. I would specifically. I've always called. I have called specifically for state-owned platform capitalism or platform socialism, I guess. I've always said that we should have all of these things that are currently being monopolized by apps should be not nationalized, but have state competitors that undercut the rates of cuts, right? So if you had your local authority undercutting Uber by creating their own rideshare app, and instead of charging drivers 25% on every journey as rent they pay to the techno-feudalists, for example, you cut that down to 5%. You just pay for the upkeep rather than the profit. Suddenly, all the drivers want to be driving with local authority rideshare app because it's more profitable for them. And it'll be cheaper for the end user because you don't have to pay for profits. So yeah, I would highly recommend, like, all of these platforms getting usurped by state versions of those same platforms. Ian McKellar's been rushed to hospital. I hope he's okay. Amazon, instead of competing in the marketplace, becomes the marketplace, at least for its Amazon Marketplace product, and then obviously takes a cut for being the people running the marketplace, rather than the state being the arbiter of the marketplace and using tax to fund public services. Amazon is now the marketplace and makes you pay tax to fund Jeff Bezos' super rich, wealthy fucking share portfolio. You know, freeze fucking cock rockets, right? Imagine thinking, we're being worried about climate change, and as Spice 8 Rack puts it, spending hours on end cleaning out chicken korma residue out of your takeaway boxes to recycle them, whilst Jeff Bezos blows up $5 million of rocket fuel to eat floaty Skittles for 10 minutes. Whilst 100 companies responsible for the other 70% of carbon emissions. Yeah, exactly. At the very least, Jeff Bezos is brave enough to board one of his cock rockets. I mean, that is true. That is true. I guess when your wife leaves you, there's not much else that you can do, right? Of the meme, Jason. Most rich men just get a new wife, true. But Mackenzie Bezos seemed really nice. No worries, Bill. See you later. Right, let's actually read Reform UK's manifesto, shall we? £10 points per spelling error. I don't think it matters so much how convincing Varoufakis' overall thesis is. He's telling you a story using socialist framing, which will hopefully gain some converts. I mean, it's not even necessarily socialist framing. Smithian capitalists are very anti-rent. Like, the free market under Adam Smith's capitalism is freedom from rent, not freedom from the government, right? Like, this idea that Adam Smith hated governments, like, you know, even under classical liberal framework, you still want some government involvement. What Adam Smith believed made a market free was the lack of rentiers, within the market. Exactly, he hated landlords, but hated just economic rent in all terms. Like, in Smithian capitalism, profit doesn't exist. Like, wages get paid out to owners and to business and to business runners, I guess, because they would also work in the business, and also to the staff of that business. And any additional profits are therefore reinvestment. That's Smithian capitalism. It's nothing like the neoliberal capitalism we have today. It's the wealth of nations, not the wealth of very few landlords. Yeah, quite. Basically, every political economist outside of the Austrian school hated landlords because you should hate landlords. They're economic dead weight. They're people who make money for nothing. They are the scroungers of our economies. I've not read it. Latest poll by Redfield and Wilton. 10,000 respondents has Labour with a 25-point lead. And with Reform UK and Tories on the same vote percentage. Might be wipeout territory, folks. I mean, if election day, if any least, right? Even if I don't really feel particularly enthused by the idea of the incoming government, and I have foreboding for the future of the country, at the very least, right, it's going to be interesting for the statisticians. Like, if you're a stats nerd, and I am absolutely, I mean, as you can say, anybody who loves elections is almost certainly a stats nerd, and I am absolutely a stats nerd. Seeing how the change in distribution of vote share is going to affect who gets elected where, that's going to be really interesting to watch from a statistical perspective. I'm looking forward to Ed Davey as leader of the opposition. I think it's a real possibility now. Yeah, basically true, Jim, yeah. I mean, like, this Delta poll from today has Labour on 46%. That's in 27 points ahead of the Tories. Although at least this Redfield and Wilton one only has the Lib Dems 6 points behind the Tories, with a very concentrated vote share. So I really do think that we'll see the Lib Dems in opposition. That's crazy. It's crazy for me to think that... It's crazy to think that the Liberal Democrats might be the opposition party. Like, this is crazy talk. Does any poll cover it by constituency so we get a better idea? So MRP polls, that's multivariate regressive, I forget what it is, multivariate regression polling, I get. An MRP, right, is, what it does is they survey a large proportion of people. They change them by area, demographic, age, socio-demographic background. Then they take projections based upon how people vote, based upon the kind of demographic that they belong to. Then they map that onto the demographic per seat and get predictions based on polling trends combined with the idea of how demographics vote to get projections on what seats look like. So MRPs are the best way of trying to find out what's happening constituency by constituency. So the last MRP poll was done by Survation, and it was between the 31st of May until the 13th of June, and had the Tories 16 points behind, with Reform on 12%. You got to remember that polling over there has been done over the period of 2 weeks, when things have changed a lot. Like, the D-Day moment happened, Nigel Farage started running again between the start of that poll and the end of that poll, so take that with a pinch of salt. Have the Lib Dems revealed their manifesto yet? Yes, they have, and it has skills wallets in it. It's better than the Labour manifesto. Like, imagine if you took the Labour manifesto with some taxes on the rich, better healthcare policy, better benefit policy, worse policy with regards to trade union donations, and without rail nationalisation. Like, the Liberal Democrat manifesto is very similar to what Labour are offering, but with less nationalisation and less state money for green investment and more money for things like, you know, welfare payments and NHS funding. But we shall see where we end up. There's still plenty of time for the polls to change between now and the election. I just think they're going to change to make the victory for Labour even bigger. So Reform UK have released their manifesto, although apparently, according to Nigel Farage, I'm not allowed to call it a manifesto. I have to call it a contract with you or a contract with the people. Because when you hear manifesto, you think that it's going to be a lie, which, to be fair to Nigel Farage, isn't necessarily untrue. Either way, let's have a read through and see what we come up with. Let's see what they're going to be talking about here. Britain needs reform, Brexit had so much potential and the opportunity of a lifetime, blah, blah, blah. Let's give some actual policies. Core pledges: smart immigration, not mass immigration, no more small boats, no NHS waiting lists, good wages for a hard day's work, and affordable, stable energy bills. Now, looking at what they're talking about here, of course, I'm not going to go over much of their immigration policy. We know they want to bring down immigration and stop the boats, right? This is policy. We know they're going to have their big immigration party, but that's not what I'm interested in on this channel. I'm interested in the policy that's a little less obvious. So their NHS waiting list, they say, still free at the point of delivery. So this French-style system that Nigel wants is a project for another time. Not immediately. They need to sell people on getting rid of the NHS first. Cut back office waste to spend more money on the front line. Tax breaks for doctors and nurses to tackle the staffing crisis, which is essentially the same as giving them a pay increase. It's identical to a pay increase giving them a tax break, so whatever, that's fine by me. But when they say they want to cut back office waste, that doesn't exist. The NHS is one of the least managed healthcare systems in the world. It's incredibly efficient already. If there was efficiency savings on managers to get cut, the Tories would have done it under George Osborne. They're not doing it now. Good wages for a hard day's work. So they're trying to do a small tax cut plan. I've already talked on this channel about how the tax cut plan is essentially a way of trying to coax and hoodwink poor people into voting for them, whilst giving bigger and better tax cuts to richer people, knowing that that rich people tax cut will allow them to buy up all the assets. So the extra 1,500 quid that you get per year is going to get you less for your money. It's going to, you're going to have more money in your pocket, but you will feel poorer because you will be able to get access to fewer resources with that money. There's a real con that they do, but please watch my other videos about that. And of course, that doesn't make people pay. Good wages don't come from tax cuts. Good wages come from demand-side labour market reform. They come from investment in productivity gains. It comes from having strong trade unions and collective bargaining rights. And it comes from smart monetary policy that helps create tight labour markets to increase wages. That's how you increase good wages. It's not by giving people tax cuts, because all that does, again, is reduce the amount of public provision of public services, something that people on lower incomes use much more of. They are net recipients of state help rather than net contributors. So if you cut taxes for everybody and reduce state provision of public services, poor people have less because the rich people can pay to go private. Affordable and stable energy bills. Scrapping net zero apparently will save people £500 a year. Not true. The reason why that we have expensive energy bills is because we pay a lot of money for wholesale oil and gas prices. Increasing our reliance on oil and gas will make us more vulnerable to exogenous shocks within those markets, whereas if we have homegrown clean energy, we can be able to power ourselves without relying on wholesale energy markets, which is how other parties are planning to reduce bills. Even the Tories think that we can reduce bills with clean energy, and they're right, we can do that. Regardless, they want to unlock our vast oil and gas reserves, but unless that's owned by the state, which it won't be, that's still going to be sold at wholesale market prices globally. Our tiny increase in supply locally is not going to massively change how much we pay for our energy overall, which is again set by LNG prices on the global markets. So their main pledges are basically all nonsense apart from immigration. I disagree with immigration. I think it's bad for the economy, but that's an ideological disagreement, not a practical disagreement with what they're saying here. Uncontrolled immigration, secure detention, stop the boats, bar student dependence. Now, the student dependence stuff is stupid. It's just going to push away students that we need for our economy. Universities are strapped for cash, and the exorbitant tuition fees that we charge foreign students is literally how we allow subsidy for our native-born students to be able to afford to go there on their smaller, still pretty large, but smaller tuition. And if people were not able to take their dependents, like children and partners, with them, they are less likely to come and spend money in our universities. Foreign capital, no less. If they're spending foreign capital, then it's an export good that they're bringing to the UK. Or it's foreign capital bring to the UK to pay for an export good. That creates export goods within our university sector. And of course, they can't get state benefits as dependents. So they're not a burden upon the state, apart from the public services that they use. And to be able to afford to be able to live, spending money on all of the necessities they need to live, like housing and food and energy and water and all of those things, they will need to either work in the UK, in which case they're being productive and they're a net benefit to the economy, or they will also be using foreign capital, therefore making a bunch of the things that we have to sell to them to make sure that they can afford to live are also going to be export goods. It's not being paid out of UK productivity. It's foreign capital with foreign productivity coming into this country to boost our economy. So it's just terrible for the economy, this student dependence rule. But the Tories also want to axe because they don't care about one of our competitive advantages in the global markets, which is our education sector. Slash government waste. Again, I've said broadly that the idea that there being this government waste, when Labour say it, when the Tories say it, when Reform say it, they all say that our public services need reforming and they need all of the waste slashing because they're inefficient. It's all nonsense. Again, we had 6 years of austerity, 9 years, 12 years, however long you want to mandate the austerity period under the Conservative Party to be. We had all of this austerity where they were specifically trying to find efficiency savings in the public sector and promised that there wouldn't be drops in service provision, and there were no efficiency savings to be found. They cut money from the state and it led to a drop in service provision. So there's not wasteful spending to cut. All of this talk about there being DEI places that need to get cut out of our NHS, for example, a bunch of nonsense, right? First of all, they have a financial reason to not get sued, and second of all, it's a tiny fraction of these government departments' budgets, okay? Now, this not paying interest to commercial banks on QE reserves plan would essentially mean, because they're not getting interest on their reserves of the central bank, banks have no incentive to give savings rates to regular people. You want to get tiered interest payments on bank reserves to make sure we save some money? That's fine. Banks will still be able to justify giving good savings rates to savers and in the country, within the population. But getting rid of it altogether is nightmare nonsense. I used to think this was a good plan. Phil, from A Different Bias, did a video about why it would be a good plan. I have now read up on what Francis Coppola specifically has said about this, and I think it's a bad idea. I think it's a bad idea because of the way it's going to affect commercial banking overall. I think a tiered system is better, though. We can save some money, just not all of the money they say they want to save. And again, 5% cuts from every single department. 5%. £5 in every £100 is a 5% cut to every budget. 5% is a cut to every single budget department. I'll say that again. £5 in every 100 is a 5% cut to every department's budget. That's what that is. That's what they're offering you. Massive slashes in public spending, which again will not lead to more efficient services. It will just lead to a drop in service provision, just like we got onto George Osborne. It is more austerity they are promising you. I'm going to cut foreign aid, which will just lead to more immigration anyway, because DFID and places like that are exactly the way in which we stop things like foreign wars, but by giving them better standard of living to protect. It stops mass immigration to the UK and into Europe by ensuring that DFID can help make these countries prosperous enough so that they don't want to flee them to come to Europe. We're doing a good job at ruining our country ourselves, but even so. Collecting billions in unpaid tax is fine, but, you'd have expected it would have been done with the powers that they've got, but at the very least, we shall hopefully see, whatever happens in the next parliament, the government's really taking tax avoidance to task. So I don't really have any problems with Reform UK saying that. Our economy needs reform. Lift the income tax, already covered why I think that is a bad idea. Cut energy taxes, beat the cost of living. I mean, the fuel duty is an excise duty to stop people using it. I think that we can maybe reform on these things, maybe reform VAT and energy bills as like a fine thing to be able to keep costs down. I would rather wholesale reform of the energy sector to make it more state-led would be better than this, but any action to help deal with how much bills cost I think isn't something I would necessarily disagree with. Cutting stamp duty is silly. It is just extra demand side reform into the housing market, this will just push up house prices. If you increase demand for houses without increasing the supply broadly in line, it will just increase house prices. This is a demand side policy. It's just like Help to Buy. It's just subsidizing demand. You know, again, stop subsidizing demand, start building more houses, start capping rents, start building social housing, start banning foreign investors, start banning Airbnb, start banning foreign capital buying up properties in the UK for investment. Control the market. Don't just subsidize demand. All it will do is push up house prices and mean that only the upper middle class kids can get on the housing ladder. Like Help to Buy, stamp duty cuts, it's all subsidizing demand. Stop it. Stop doing it. It's bad. Abolish inheritance tax for all estates under £2 million. So that is halving the number of people who will end up paying inheritance tax. But if you are inheriting £2 million worth of assets, you do not need a tax break. You do not need a tax break if you're inheriting £2 million worth of assets. Again, it's because Reform UK is a party run by privately educated rich people who have lots of assets, right? Richard Tice is literally in a property development company. He is somebody who makes loads of money out of owning assets and will stand to lose money if the assets he owns get passed down to somebody else, because they're almost certainly more than 2 million. They're just trying to get themselves out of paying tax. That's all it is. And again, it's a tax break for really rich people, which they will use to buy up more assets with the extra liquidity to make those assets harder to acquire for working class people. Yes, even the ones who are getting a £1,500 tax cut a year, because the people who are massively rich are getting a way bigger tax cut and will be able to leverage that better within the market. Again, it's just a con. Make sure that you are looking out for why they're conning you with tax policy. Economy needs reform for the business sector, apparently, as well. Free small and medium-sized businesses from corporation tax. Lift the minimum profit threshold to 100k. Reduce the main corporation tax rate from 25 to 20%, then to 15% from year 3. So these small companies already only pay 19%. And there were also mitigations for one slightly bigger than that to only pay 19%. 25% is the rate of corporation tax that the big mega corporations pay. So this isn't a tax cut for small businesses. This is a tax cut for big businesses. The small businesses already have tax relief on their corporation tax. This is very silly. Abolish IR35 rules. I know that sole traders have problems with IR35, so I will leave that to the experts, but at the very least, it seems fine, given how much I know people who are self-employed do moan about IR35, so fair enough. Lift the VAT threshold to £150,000. I mean, that seems fine if it's at the bottom end of the scale for small entrepreneurs. Abolish business rates for high street SMEs, and then that's good to take power away from like the big corporations. Reforming planning is fine because we need to build more houses. Slashing red tape to boost industry and exports is just deregulation. It's just deregulation that's going to help people be able to avoid scrutiny for bad business decisions that are lack of social utility. And reforming the tax system is essentially their plan to try and make fewer people pay tax so they can slash public service spending again. Reform UK will back risk takers and wealth creators. Yeah, wealth creators is working people. Productive people are those who create wealth. Those who create the wealth of our civilization is those who apply labour to capital. It's the people who sell their labour for a wage to those who earn the means of production. It is not capitalists who create wealth, Nigel. Despite record extra funding in recent years, NHS healthcare outcomes have declined. Yes, because of too much privatisation, and the extra funding is going into crony contracts and PPE during the pandemic. Again, we are still not doing enough that we need to do so. The Nuffield Trust has come out essentially saying that the Tories and the Labour Party on current manifesto plans are going to leave the NHS in a worse state than it was under austerity. So their plans to cut 5% from every government department will also make the NHS worse as well. Like, their plans for nurses is fine to be able to give them extra money, like a tax cut and a pay rise for these people being paid by the public sector is essentially the same thing. There is no spare independent, obviously private, healthcare capacity, right? So private healthcare capacity is not spare, it's just the NHS provision. So that's not something you can use to reduce waiting lists. That's a lie. It's the same lie that West Streeting tells you. Funny how West Streeting and Nigel Farage have the same policy. Tax relief of private healthcare is just, again, just a bung to the private sector, a bung to private healthcare magnates, a bung to rich businessmen and big pharma. It's funny, these people, these anti-elitists, these populists who say big pharma is bad, sure do love giving tax breaks to big pharma. Save A&E, right, but that's just that. Cut waiting times with pharmacy first, GP second, A&E last. I mean, that's not like a real policy. A&E exists for a reason, because it's necessary. I get that there are people who don't come to A&E for the right reasons, but they get turned away if it's not a legitimate concern anyway. Improved efficiency, we're already very efficient, as I've said before. NHS voucher scheme, again, if you go for a voucher for private treatment, you're not skipping the queue. So you're not using extra capacity, you're just skipping the queue because there's no spare capacity in the private sector. And a vaccine-harmed public inquiry, well, again, just a little thing for the conspiracy theorists at the very least. Net zero is crippling our economy. I've already gone over why this is nonsense. Law and order needs reform. Increased police numbers seems fair enough. They've already been cut by the Tories. Zero tolerance policing, like things like broken windows policing and stop and search, have been shown not to work. These are authoritarian policies that broadly the public do like. The public do support these policies, but they're not good. They don't succeed in bringing down crime rates and historically have not done so. Common sense policing, not woke policing. I mean, there isn't two-tier policing. Like, the idea that DEI is causing two-tier policing is crazy. The two-tier policing is the fact that black children are far more likely to get stop and searched than white children, and the Casey review exposing the internal bigotry problems within the police force. But the idea that means DEI is a bad thing when it would specifically solve this problem and solve the issue of two-tier policing between minority communities and majority communities, that's the opposite of what they're saying here. And on top of that, when they say two-tier policing, they are dog whistling to the Tommy Robinson types that somehow the far right are being treated worse by the police. It's just, as I've mentioned in videos before, which I'll link into the description, the reason why the far right always come off worse against police is because they're idiots and they don't understand that they voted through draconian police powers with Suella Braverman's police crime and sentencing bill, which the police used to curb their protests. They wore masks when they weren't supposed to. They supported the government when they took away the right for lefty protesters to wear masks. We stopped wearing them. We have our little net poll briefing before every protest telling us how not to do things to ensure that we don't get our ass kicked by the police. We've all watched the Chris Rock sketch, right? Yet rightoids and the Tommy Robinson types, they don't know what the police's duties are. They don't do the proper research beforehand to understand what will get them arrested and kettled and what won't, because they're idiots. And they think, oh, well, they didn't do this to lefty protesters. Yeah, because we know what the hell we're doing. We're professional protesters, right? If there's one thing that leftoids will do is we protest all the time. We know the shit that we're doing, whereas rightoids are idiots who don't bother researching beforehand. Depoliticize the College of Policing? Replace degree standard entry with an entrance exam. I'm sure massively reducing the education requirements for people to become police officers is not going to have any negative externalities whatsoever. Justice system needs reform. Criminal justice budget seems fine. Change the definition of hate crime. Oh, they're talking about non-crime hate incidents, which I do agree should be getting rid of. I don't like the idea of there being a non-crime hate incident logged by the police. What it essentially means is somebody was offended when, they reported it to the cops, right? If it's a hate crime, it's a hate crime. If it's a non-hate incident, it doesn't need to be a crime. It doesn't need to be logged by the cops. I think that's fair enough. Tackling youth crime, high-intensity training camps. Again, address material conditions. Again, it's exactly the same as like the Miriam Davis garbage. Sorry, the Miriam Cates garbage. Where they will say shit like young people cause crime because their mental health has been destroyed by social media. I'm like, no, their material conditions just suck. Like, we need access to things like Sure Start and public programs to help people to be able to lift living standards, because relative poverty is one of the biggest drivers of crime. But they have no plans to make relative poverty better. In fact, all of their plans make relative poverty worse, because they're giving massive tax cuts to rich people and very small tax cuts to poor people. That will make inequality worse and relative poverty worse. And I want to do extra detention, I guess. Very, very authoritarian. But again, it plays well with the public, so it makes sense. Too many young people are being let down. Education system that they make sure that young people are proud of Britain. Well, that's definitely not authoritarian. They want a patriotic curriculum in schools and primary schools and secondary schools. They want a patriotic curriculum in schools. Any teaching about a period or example of British or European imperialism or slavery must be paired with the teaching of a non-European occurrence of the same to ensure balance. What? What? The entirety of the modern world has been shaped by European imperialism. The idea that you can just say, well, I know we were bad, but did you hear that this happened one time when there was imperialism elsewhere? I'm like, yeah, but it didn't have the same effect though, did it? That's a really weird gripe. It's so much like weird conspiracy shit, like this idea that woke teachers are indoctrinating our children, or DEI is ruining the police, or the stuff about like vaccine harms and injury stuff, like real kind of mainstream conspiracy theory stuff. I wonder if they mention the World Economic Forum at any point during this manifesto. History and social science curriculum to be reviewed and audited regularly to ensure balance. Again, who decides what balance is? Our children must be taught about their heritage. We get taught about our heritage. Do you think they just stopped teaching who Henry VIII was? And now they just teach them about how Ho Chi Minh defeated the imperialists of France and America twice? Like, come on. What do they think is being taught in schools? Have they ever spent any time in school? It's just like the Eric Kaufman thing for policy exchange, where they were desperate to prove that woke teachers were indoctrinating children into what Eric Kaufman described as cultural socialism. So he commissioned a study by policy exchange into young people's engagement with critical social justice, whatever kind of canard or epithet they want to use for young people being progressive. And they commissioned this report for policy exchange. And it came up that actually, no, they're not being taught about woke subjects at school. In fact, when it comes to things like social justice and progressivism issues, only 10% said they first heard these issues at school. The vast majority heard them online, within peer groups, on social media. The idea that this is a woke schools teaching our children to hate Britain is just nonsense. It doesn't have any basis in reality. It's just a conspiracy theory. Again, it comes back to the centrist bell curve, where they believe that if young people are all left-wing, it can't be because it's the basis of material conditions, because usually there is like a small amount of extremes in one big centre, but obviously the young people are very extreme towards the left. But that's not a function of them being indoctrinated. It's not some fifth column turning them into Marxists. They're responding to their material conditions, but they don't believe our material conditions are bad. They believe we're eating too much avocado toast. Ban transgender ideology. There's not an ideology. Trans people just exist. No gender questioning, social transitioning, or pronoun swapping. Well, you can't stop me. You can't stop us from using different pronouns. Like, social transitioning is just wearing different clothes. Like, how are you going to enforce this? No gender questioning. Gender questioning is an internal process with oneself. How are you going to enforce? That's very silly. And also, schools already have single-sex facilities. They just have some mixed-sex facilities as well. I think it's fine if you have some single-sex and some mixed. That's absolutely fine. As long as the single-sex facilities exist somewhere, that's fine. Again, so you want to roll back on Labour's plans to have VAT on private schools, which is, again, just a sop to rich people. Scrapping interest on student loans is good. Cut funding to universities that undermine free speech. Now, I've talked a lot about this on this channel, but I'm going to reiterate it again. The reason why universities are capitulating to students who have demands over who does or doesn't speak doesn't happen actually very often. This idea of deplatforming, cancelling people, it just happens to people who have big platforms to moan about it. Now, plenty of right-wing speakers speak at universities without a problem. It's just when Ben Shapiro or Milo Yiannopoulos or Kathleen Stock come along, to not talk rationally, but to use it as a propaganda podium for them to be able to spread their hatred, people kick off like they did with Zipiotavelli, like the literal fascist from Israel. The reason why universities are capitulating to these demands is because they have been turned into businesses. They are profit-seeking entities. They are not instruments of social utility anymore. They're not there trying to create the best students. They are there to try and get as many consumers as possible. They are trying to make as much money as possible. It's why they maximise the amount of students they get in from UK, from overseas, because it makes them lots of money to do so. And if they think they're going to lose access to that capital, those students paying them money, their profits, because they are inviting speakers who are going to make people less likely to go and study at their universities, they're not going to do it, right? They're not students, they're clients. Why should people who are paying for a service get shitty service in their mind's eye, right? They're not being treated as students who are being imparted with wisdom. They are clients who are paying for a product. And if they don't like the product, they will send it back. And if your product includes Milo Yiannopoulos going along to a bunch of university campuses, picking out individual trans people from those universities to publicly mock them, which is a thing that he did, by the way, yeah, people are going to get mad and want him not to get invited. Because, again, they are clients buying a product. They're consumers buying a product, and the product is faulty, and they want to send it back. It's as simple as that. 2-year courses, whatever, seems fine. Benefit system is broken. Reform to benefit support and training, that means nothing. Job seekers and those fit to work must find employment within 4 months or accept a job after 2 offers. What? How are you going to make them have job offers? Are you doing a fucking work fair? Are you doing a federal jobs guarantee? How are you going to make sure that these 2 job offers are available to them? And again, this is a big lie that they tell, that there's this kind of massive glut of like long-term benefit seekers. It's just not true. Like the number of people who claim welfare is static somewhat and has grown slightly, but it's an ever-shaping, ever-changing group of people who come in and out based upon whether or not they're employed or not. Like you can't just get rid of the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. You can't get unemployment down to 0, otherwise you have an inflationary spiral. And then unemployment happens because there's an inflationary spiral, and you go back to the Nairu. This idea that you can just get rid of everybody's benefits if they don't find a job is nonsensical, because unemployment is a specific part of capitalist markets. Capitalist labour markets mandate unemployment unless you have a federal jobs guarantee. Read Koletsky. He outlines it perfectly as to why the capitalists do not want a full employment economy. And if you don't have a full employment economy and you get rid of people's benefits because they can't find a job, then you're just killing these people at the end of the day. It's stupid non-policy that is there as red meat to idiots rather than because they understand how economics works. And then face-to-face assessments for people getting PIP. Just more ATOS miracles that they want to do, more humiliating assessments for the disabled people as again, which cost more to administer. They cost more to administer than the benefits they pay out to the disabled people for PIP. It costs more to administer PIP than it does to give people the PIP in the first place by doing the means test. It's really stupid. Employment is critical to mental health. I mean, I've read this beforehand. It does say things like getting people into jobs will improve their mental health, and it's just nonsense, right? Like, you're going to be more mentally healthy peeing in bottles in your Amazon warehouse, right? Like, come on, like, get a grip. Good work, work that pays, work where you have a vocation, work where you feel like you have a future, where you feel like you have somewhere to be able to progress to, where you feel like you're going to be able to own assets to be able to create a nest egg for yourself. That is rewarding and probably could be good for your mental health. But that's not the employment market we have in 2024. We have people humping shit for Uber Eats. We have the gig economy. We have low workers' rights. We have low worker remuneration. We have low terms and conditions for workers. And of course, assets are really expensive, like houses. So people who do work don't believe that this is a route to getting themselves a nest egg. It's just working is things they have to do to pay the landlords to own the house that they live in. They're not accumulating assets or wealth or savings. They are working to live. And this it basically applies to huge swathes of the population under 50 in this country. And that is not good for your mental health. Again, you can say that work is good for people, it's necessary for a functioning economy, but the very, very specific problem that we have with people having poor mental health is the feeling that it's pointless. The feeling of working to live is what the problem is. Unless you reindustrialize, which they have no industrial strategy to do, the good vocational jobs that set you up for life and have that progression and let you build a vocation, that let you build a future and build a nest egg for yourself, those aren't coming back. And they want to do more supply-side labour market reforms that are going to push down wages and make life worse for everybody who works. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. But it's against red meat policy. Brexit, scrappier regulations, winter framework. Okay, so they just want to restart the troubles, I guess. Whatever. Not really fussed about Brexit. Not really care about armed forces policy. Housing crisis plan. Now, I think that some of these are okay. Fast track and tax incentives development for brownfield sites, that's fine. To review planning system, we all agree the planning system needs reform now. Reform social housing law, I think, is just kind of racism bait. Like a lot of these things where they say they pick very specific certain areas where foreign nationals are on social housing lists, but broadly across the country, the social housing stock has a similar amount of foreign-born people in it than is the demographic across the UK as well. And those communities which have high levels of foreign-born people or foreign nationals in social housing are communities where broadly the community itself has a high number of people who are foreign nationals. So scrap Section 24 for landlords. The tax system should encourage smaller landlords. No, we should be banning landlords. Landlords are rentiers who are bad for the overall macroeconomy. We need to have more owner-occupiers. But if you incentivize landlords to buy up the new housing stock, you won't make more owner-occupiers. All you make is more renters and more middle-class people with housing wealth that they don't need, in addition to their existing housing wealth. And obviously want to abolish the Renters Reform Bill because they hate young people and hate renters, because they're applying their trying to get old people to vote for them, not young people, so they don't have to care about doing good for renters, because most older people are owner-occupiers and not renters. Obviously, leasehold reform is fine. New construction technology, I agree. Support marriage for the tax system seems fine. Majority of mothers would choose to stay at home more if they could. Front-loading the child benefit system for all children aged 1 to 4 would give the parents the choice to spend more time with their children. I mean, it's interesting that they say stay-at-home mums or dads, which is fine. I think parents should have more time with their children. You need to pay the breadwinner more, though. We're going to need some demand-side labour market reform so that people are paid enough to be able to support a family on one income, which they cannot do because of supply-side labour market reform, because of Thatcherite labour market reform that Reform UK support and want to continue with. Like, they want to essentially subsidise people staying at home, which is fine. Like, child benefit is fine to keep people to be able to care for their children, whether they're a mum or a dad. Mandate single-sex space is just Kemi Badenoch shit. Child-friendly app-restricted smartphones, sure. And review the online safety bill, which bear is trash, just use a VPN. Crumbling infrastructure. Now, this is where it actually gets okay. I disagree with scrapping HS2. We need more high-speed rail. The war on drivers it's just nonsense. That's not true. Again, back to the mainstream conspiracy theory stuff, talking about, low traffic neighborhoods and 15-minute cities specifically. This is part of their World Economic Forum plot to try and get you out of your car. And I'm like, we should get people out of their cars because it's bad for the environment and it's expensive and it uses up fuel. Like, we need more subsidized demand, indeed. We need more induced demand using extra supply for public transport to replace motorists rather than just banning motorists. But low traffic neighborhoods are good for pedestrians, they're good for businesses, they're good for air quality, they are good in general to be able to have people in places where they can live properly with more third spaces rather than sectioning out huge swathes of our city space for fucking cars. No, these aren't supposed to be for cars, they're for people. Get rid of the cars. Low traffic neighborhoods are based, and we should have more of them. There is no war on drivers. Drivers are the ones who've been pandered to by transport policy consistently for half a century. It's high time we taught these people that they cannot monopolise transport policy in this country. Although, to be fair, having more rail links in the north is good. And one thing that is good is this policy right here. Tighter regulation and a new ownership model for critical infrastructure. The British taxpayer needs to be in control of Britain's utilities. Launch a new model that brings 50% of each utility into public ownership. The other 50% will be owned by UK pension funds, benefiting from new expertise and better management. We will ensure standing charges are capped to help low users and pensioners. Now, this is good. I like these plans a lot. 50% by 50% is a good way of doing it. It's just how Botswana deal with their diamond mines. They are 50% state-owned. The issue, of course, is this just new infrastructure? Is this new infrastructure projects? Is this nationalising old utilities like water and energy? Because I notice in the costings here, it says £25 billion worth of savings one-off and £5 billion per year. So I'm assuming they're not nationalising any existing utilities. It's just going to be new utilities that get created, which, of course, We'll see how much of that actually gets built. But having an infrastructure bank seems like a good thing, but we should have net zero objectives. British farming needs reform. I mean, I always agree with farming subsidy. We have to be more self-sufficient on farming policy. And New Reform UK agree with the Greens broadly on this, and getting British agriculture back on its feet is good. I just think that climate-related stuff is where we differ on this. We should be maximising climate-friendly farming through subsidy rather than taking away subsidy for these things. But broadly, the idea that we should buy British to be more environmentally conscious and to keep money in our local economies and help our current struggling farmers to be able to produce food for ourselves so we don't rely on imports when we have a gigantic trade deficit and trade is worse post-Brexit. I think these are fine. I think these are fine policies. I don't really care about the fishing industry. I mean, you ruined it with Brexit. Elderly care. Commence Royal Commission to the inquiry of a social care system, which I guess wants to be cross-party, which is basically what West Streeting was saying on Laura Kay this weekend. Wanting to change pension provision to be like Australia's superannuation seems a bit sus, but we'll see. That's just a review. Anything, I don't really care. If they want to have pension funds invest in UK infrastructure, that seems okay. End the mine workers' pension scandal seems fine. That's what also on Labour's manifesto. Constitutional reform. Leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Terrible. Again, just, we will take away your rights, but we will also take away somebody else's rights. So you like this? Do you want to cut your nose off to spite your face, Britain? Essentially what they're saying. Reforming the House of Lords is good. Postal voting reform is not leading to electoral fraud. This is stupid Trumpian conspiracy theory nonsense. Proportional representation, 100%. British Bill of Rights, no, we're fine with our European rights, actually. I do not trust right-wingers to be able to protect my fucking rights, actually. Thank you very much. Reclaiming Britain. Now, this is where things get weird, okay? Reaffirm British sovereignty. Reject the influence of the World Economic Forum. There's another conspiracy theory. There you go. There you go. I called it, chat. I called it that they would end up mentioning the World Economic Forum policy at some point during the document here. Thank you for the 10 gifted Morticia. That's very, very, very generous of you. And yeah, the 100 bits as well. Thank you very much for that too. But the World Economic Forum stuff, again, it's just conspiracy theory. Reject the World Health Organization pandemic treaty. Again, do you want to make us more exposed to future pandemics, I guess? Obviously, they want to cut a bunch of provision from the healthcare service, which is why we're in the mess with the pandemic currently, because austerity cuts. Reducing our preparedness for a pandemic is what screwed us over. Cancel membership of the World Health Organization? Jesus Christ, okay. Opposing central bank digital currencies. We oppose a cashless society. Now, I understand, right? The CBDC stuff is basically a conspiracy theory at this point, but I do understand people's concerns about moving to cashless society. It's not happening though. People don't want a cashless society, and basically no government can get away with a cashless society. But the CBDC stuff is essentially just pro-fractional reserve banking propaganda. Like, CBDCs allow governments to be able to create money without going through private banks to do that, and private banks hate this. Private banks really hate the idea that governments can bypass them with money creation, because currently all money creation of new money goes through private banks in gilt markets and things like that. The fractional reserve banking industry is absolutely seething at the idea of CBDCs, and so they've spread propaganda through social media to make people think that it's some sinister government conspiracy plot to destroy how much that you can use your money. I'm like, no, we just want to be able to create money using the central bank, but also by avoiding having to use the commercial banks. Commercial banks are running this conspiracy theory, and people are buying into it for no reason. The Equalities Act requires discrimination in the name of positive action. No, it doesn't. We will scrap DEI rules that have lowered standards and reduced productivity. No evidence for this. Comprehensive free speech bill. Legislature stopped left-wing bias and politically correct ideology that threatens personal freedom and democracy. Again, no evidence for this. No evidence for any of this. What left-wing bias? Every single sector in this country, apart from education and healthcare, has basically been privatized. We have a very, very right-wing country. But I guess one person said that you shouldn't call people by a slur, and the rightoids got mad, apparently. Cancel culture, left-wing hate mobs. We're going to legislate Twitter to stop dog piles. I guess Tories already tried to do this. Political bias in public institutions. Again, no evidence for this. Stop Sharia law being used in the UK. It's not being used in the UK. Like, that's not a thing that's happening. Another conspiracy theory that the Muslims are coming over here to great replace you and then to change our law to Sharia law. Absolute nonsense, conspiracy bullshit. No more debanking. I mean, it depends. Debanking for political reasons, like the man who was gotten rid of from Halifax, that's fair enough. Debanking because you as a rich person like Nigel Farage fell under the financial viability of your account at Coutts. It's not the same thing. If you don't have enough money invested in Coutts who require £3 million worth of assets stored with them, which you have fallen under as financial viability, you cannot get mad when they get rid of your account that you signed up for once you fail to meet the requisite requirements to keep that account. I'm sorry, that's not being debanked. That's just failing. They offered you a NatWest account that normal proles can use, Nigel, and you turned it down. You turned down the Prowell Bank because you're too posh for it. You wanted your swanky, exclusive, high-ticket, posh person's bank, and you couldn't deal with the idea that you had to share a bank with the undesirables like NatWest, who own Coutts anyway. Because he's pathetic. He's a pathetic little man-child. Commence reform of the BBC. It's institutionally biased. Yeah, to the right, we have evidence they're institutionally biased. They listed an internal audit showing that economic output is biased to the right by framing government debt as being bad. That's an internal assessment of the BBC's own economic coverage. More public holidays, just a Corbyn-era policies, that's fine. Anti-corruption unit is also fine. We do have too much corruption, it's absolutely fine. And then there's this funding document here as well, which I do not have enough tax knowledge to be able to go through. Well, that was mental. That was absolutely mental. So, yeah, there are a couple of good policies. I'm not going to say everything was bad. Like, the infrastructure plans are good. A bunch of the things that help, like, our healthcare workers are good, like getting them out of taxation by giving essentially a pay increase by a different name. That's good policy. I like that. That would help solve doctor strikes almost immediately if you give them a pay rise that they were asking for specifically. But outside of like a couple of policies, a lot of it was just sopped for the rich, like inheritance tax cuts, like corporation tax cuts for mega corporations, like no VAC on private school fees, like cutting inheritance tax, all of these things that they are doing to be able to gift rich people even more money, like tax breaks for private healthcare corporations. Like, that's just a sop to rich people. That's all bad. And then on top of that, on top of all of this terrible economic policy, the slashing of public budgets so that poor people who rely on public services have even weaker public services at a time when they're already on their knees. On top of all of this, there's just conspiracy theories everywhere about the vaccines, about the WAF, about the WHO, about transgender ideology, about critical race theory, about woke teachers indoctrinating our students. All of these things, it's just conspiracy theory nonsense done by people who are obsessed with this idea that young people don't have the same values as them to pander with red meat to boomers who can't understand why young people have different opinions to them. That's exactly what this manifesto is. It's just a conspiracy. It's a mainstream conspiracy theory manifesto, like 15-minute cities and low traffic neighborhoods and the war on motorists. These aren't things that are happening. These are things that are in your brain because you're not being pandered to anymore. And again, I expect them to get lots of votes amongst boomers with this manifesto. Young people, though, if you vote for this, you're an idiot. Like anyone who votes for this is an idiot. But young people, especially working age young people, especially who vote for this, you are cutting off your nose to spite your face. You are making your life worse because Nigel Farage is a charismatic leader. He's selling snake oil. Do not buy that snake oil. Take it from me. Did you vote reforms to get the Conservatives out? Hashtag vote tactically. I mean, look, the red team good people would literally could say that. Might literally say that. I mean, student young people, I mean, they shouldn't vote for either, but students are getting a better deal out of this than working people are. Yeah, I'm just going to ban somebody who uses the R slur, sorry. So Morticia, you used 100 bits for a message that didn't read out because I had alerts turned off. I was doing a lot of reading. So I'm going to say fucking neoliberalism was the message that you sent. Thank you very much for the message. And thank you, Big Al, for the 17th month of Prime in a row. It's very much appreciated. I mean, that's true, actually, Jam Teapot. You're absolutely right. That there is a worry that anti-corruption measures are used as a Trojan horse to... are used as a Trojan horse to push through consolidation of power and the kneecapping of opponents.
Neoliberalism.
Fucking neoliberalism.
Thank you, Emma Kelly, for the 7th month of Prime. I appreciate you. It's scary thinking that manifesto could become government policy in 2029. Yep. Welcome to Singapore on Thames. Looking good. What to say about the future of reform post-election? I think they'll become... It depends how many seats they get and how much a percentage of the vote that they get, right? Because there's this real sweet spot with Reform UK. There's a real sweet spot. If they get like 12, 13%, for example, that's not enough of a percentage of the vote for them to get on Question Time or Sky News with any amount of regularity outside of election periods. On 13% is about how much the Lib Dems have, and they very rarely get like continued access to the parapet when it comes to programming on Sky and on BBC, for example, who they get in as being an analyst, somebody with relationship with Reform UK. That's not likely to happen on 13%. But if Reform UK are on 13% and the Tories are on 20%, the Tories are still wiped out and the Lib Dems become like the official opposition on those kind of vote shares, and Reform UK don't have enough MPs. So that sweet spot of like 13, 14% of Reform UK voters, with the Tories around about 20%, is exactly how much the vote share that they would need to be able to ensure that the political discourse is controlled by Labour and controlled by the Liberal Democrats. And the Tories and Reform, on small percentage of the vote and small seat shares, will be pushed out of the discourse, at least somewhat. So they'll be forced onto social media, which is just about like the conspiracy theory nutcases rather than like sensible discourse. The banking stuff over here is, oh, the woke left banks are punishing us for our opinions, when most of the ones complaining we're getting Russian money or other dark money to promote fascism, culture wars, and white nationalism in the UK. Well, yeah, exactly. What's the thing? That's the thing, is that, do you remember how Elon Musk, right, when he bought Twitter, he got rid of what he called like the woke rules, for example, because he thought that they were being implemented for ideological reasons by woke people in the background of the company, when actually they were being done by business people to make money. So just kept rolling back on them because they were making less money on the platform. Like, this is exactly what the Reform UK people do. Like, they think that there was a woke left-wing conspiracy trying to take over our institutions and turn them all into, like, liberal, like, liberal, woke, blah, blah, whatever, like, indoctrination camps, when really and truly it's mostly just people acting within market economies, making rational market decisions for business reasons because people don't want to shop at companies that say bad things about minorities. As simple as that. It's a business decision based on market feedback. And also, people who are educated, it skews left because the truth skews left. I expect the Greens will get 2 seats. I expect them to get Bristol Central and Prime Pavilion, but nothing else really. Thank you for the 10 gift. It was really appreciated, Morticia. Thank you for the support. Remember, as always, you can support the stream by subscribing on Twitch with Prime or with money, by dropping bits for text-to-speech. 100 bits gets you that. Memberships on YouTube are 99p, cheaper than the can of red stripe. You can gift memberships to your fellow viewers. And, of course, you can super chat. I read out super chats live on stream. So if anybody wants to throw This is my last stream for a week, by the way. We've had 6 memberships gifted on YouTube today. So if you want to make sure I can be kept going, even without working for a week, I know I'm on holiday, right? So I shouldn't really complain. But if you want to make sure that I can function whilst taking a week off of making streams during the election period, if people want to gift a stack of memberships over on YouTube to keep the stream going, I'll be very much appreciated. Looks like we're second in almost 50 seats.
YouTubers who have Prime. This is the link.
Thank you. Yeah, if you YouTube viewers, if you have Amazon Prime, pop over to Twitch chat and use the link to link your Prime account to then get a free subscription over on Twitch. It costs you nothing. It's included in your Twitch Prime, in your Amazon Prime subscription, but gives me some of Jeff Bezos' money. It's well worth doing, and you get all of the benefits. Thank you for the 1,000 bits, Zio.
Britpol for the win.
Britpol for the win indeed. Appreciate you. Thank you very much for the support. But yeah, like, there's definitely a green base for later. If we're second in 50 or so seats, that's a base we can build on for the next election. It's so blatant that Reform has bots running around TikTok and stuff. Oh yeah, 100%, yeah. It's bot central. Yeah, I'm desperate. I'm desperate for Thangam Debonair to fuck off. I hate that cunt. I really do. Hey! David, thank you for the 5 gifted over on Twitch. Appreciate the support. And Scouse Raw with the 10 memberships. Thank you for that. Appreciate you. How well do you see local campaigns in Ilford North, Chingford and Islington North doing? Islington North is going to go really well. I think Chingford is a stretch, but possible. I think Ilford North is going to be won by West Streeting, unfortunately. I do not see West Streeting being unseated by Leanne Mohammed.
Neoliberalism.
As much as good as her campaign has been, according to canvassers on the ground I've spoken to, on stream as well, actually. I spoke to a Leanne Mohammed canvasser on stream specifically, but I don't think she's going to be able to have enough support to be able to unseat a shadow minister.
Neoliberalism.
So really interesting. I think the Islington North will be won by Corbyn. I think Faisal Shaheen will come close, but lose in Chingford. And I think West Streeting will win easily in Ilford North. But we'll see. We'll see.
Fucking neoliberalism.
Not nothing to improve the country, NWA, just not enough to stave off fascism. Hey, Robert, thank you for the 5 gifted over on Twitch, on YouTube. Appreciate
neoliberalism.
you. Yeah, Wes Tufton Streeting, exactly. I mean, the guy got loads of videos of West Streeting speaking at Policy Exchange. Any places the Greens could have a surprise result? Isle of Wight West.
Fucking
Isle of Wight West.
I'm actually very right wing, and I loved it.
The Isle of Wight West seat could be an unexpected gain for the Greens. Sheffield Central could be an unexpected gain for the Greens in Sheffield Central there as well. I don't think they'll win in North Herefordshire or Waveney Valley at all, but I do think they'll win in Brighton Pavilion and Bristol Central, and there could be surprises in Bristol West and Isle of Wight West. But again, I really do think it'll only be the 2. I do think it'll only be the 2. Is my guess. It'll be the 2 for the Greens, but they'll come close. They'll definitely come close in a couple of seats as well. I mean, absolutely. Like Leanne Mohammed winning would be absolutely like the best possible scenario. I want West Streeting out of politics forever. Of course, they'll make him a lord or some shit. But either way, Leanne Mohammed winning would be amazing. We shall see. Sheffield Central would be a great one, especially because it increases the influence of the core cities in the party. I agree. They already have a bunch of council seats in Sheffield Central. There's a lot of canvassers on the ground in Sheffield Central. They've just replaced the candidate in Sheffield Central. I know it sounds very kind of Morgan McSweeney to do, but the candidate Alison Teal they did have was like a massive, massive turf. Like, she was absolutely like lost in the sauce turf, not like one of those kind of casual transphobes, like a real, like, honest to God turf. And so she's been replaced by a pro LGBTQ plus candidate. So I can now fully endorse the Greens in Sheffield Central again. But again, like, if you say big, like, what's frustrating is this idea that we think people say, oh, you're against. How can you be against Labour getting rid of Faisal Shaheen, but for the Greens getting rid of Alison Teal? I'm like, I have no problem. I have zero problem with candidates being removed or unsupported because of bigoted things they've said in the past, right? I have no problem with removing people who are problems for the party brand in terms of ideological direction from being candidates. I actually don't have a problem with this. Like, it was good, actually. The Labour removed their support from Azhar Ali. I think his comments were terrible. And I think they absolutely were right to get rid of him from their support for the candidacy. Like, that was a good thing that they did. I think it's good that the Greens have gotten rid of Alison Teal and a couple of other people who've said some dodgy stuff, right, about Israel, for example. I think these are fine, right? The issue with Faiza Shaheen is that she said fucking nothing wrong. Like, she literally said nothing wrong. That's the problem with Faiza Shaheen. Not that it's bad. You get rid of people if they've said sus things. She didn't do a fucking thing wrong. That's what's the problem. Absolutely no fucking quarter given to the TERFs now. We can't afford it for survival. Exactly. You're absolutely right, Jam. Yeah, like I would vote Conservative in Canterbury to get rid of Rosie Duffield. Their candidate is pro-LGBT. Pfizer's mistake was being too popular to toe the party line. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We're on a hype train on Twitch. Make the hype train go choo-choo if you want. I'm going to force you to. Probably going to raid out in a second anyway because it's quite late. I need to do editing and packing for tomorrow, so... How do you see the SNP doing in Scotland? Apparently McSweeney is targeting the central Scottish seats for the election. The latest MRP poll I've seen predicts the SNP not to do as bad as I expected. I think Stephen Flynn's performance in the debates has been really good at turning around opinion. So maybe the SNP will do a little bit better than we expected. So I was expecting them to get like, you know, lose like 30 seats or so, but maybe they'll do better than usual. You should vote for in Malden. Let me check the stats. Yeah, it's always worth voting Green in your safe seat. In Malden. Are you in Colchester South and Malden? Malden and North East Chelmsford? Oh, no, Malden is now a new constituency. Okay, that's right. Found it. The Wikipedia page was confusing, sorry. I do apologise. Elections, there we go. Let's have a look at Malden, shall we? Oh, right. Tories are fucking massively far ahead. Literally anybody could win in this seat, so just vote Green. But it'll most likely be that's a very safe Tory seat. Jesus. I would just vote Green. Seething and Malden. Janet Bland. I thought I said Janet Bland for a minute there. Actually, the Liberal Democrats used to be like the main challenger, and then like the Clegsidus dropped them by 14.8%. That's very funny to me. The Clegsidus was a very funny moment. Yeah, look at everyone. Like, if you're ever bored one time, chat. If you're ever bored and you want to have a look, just go through every constituency in the country. Just go through constituencies, just random constituencies in the country, and then look at the 2015 election, look at the Labour percentage of the vote, and then look at the 2019 election and see how much more votes the Labour Party got in 2017. It's crazy. It's honestly crazy. Every single seat that you go, you see this absolute fucking gigantic like torrent of new votes for the Labour Party in 2017. I can't imagine what that was because of. I recommend electoral calculus, Slimy Redneck. No, this is not a Labour area, right? Labour used to be on 12% in 2010. And the Lib Dems were a main challenger. In 2015, they all dropped off, and Labour was still even lower than that, with, you know, 12%, right? The UKIP were the main challenger. And you go to 2017, they got fucking an extra 10 points of the vote. Remember when young people were interested in voting? I know, right? What crazy. But new people were like brought in across the country into the Corbyn project. Yeah, the Clegs just really killed the Lib Dems. Good, they fucking deserved it. And then the anti-Semitism stuff and Salisbury happened and second referendum bullshit. Just a whole mess. A whole Labour mess from 2017 to 2020. Right, let's go. Let's fucking raid out. I'm tired. I want to be able to edit and go to bed. To get ready for my trip tomorrow. Yeah. Right, send you into President Sunday, YouTube viewers. Well, I like the Liberal Democrat manifesto, but they were right to get wiped out in 2017. In 2015 even, sorry. Right, Twitch viewers, I'm going to raid you into the 27 Club. My best buddy. Or $27, as I will still call him, because I'm a dead-naming son of a bitch. I will post some snaps. You'll be able to see me. I'll definitely post some updates on the Discord and tell like that. Make sure everyone knows how I'm doing. I'll raid YouTube viewers. You're going to go into President Sunday, friend of the show, actual friend of the show. As always, thank you very much for hanging around. Appreciate your support. I'll be back in a week, or 8 days, I believe. I'll be back to be able to take you through some more content. I'll be posting some clips over on the YouTubes whilst I'm away. As always, thank you for watching. Thank you for your chats, for bits, the subs, the memberships, everything you do to support the channel. It's always very much appreciated. Everybody for coming and contributing. I really appreciate all of the kind words. Everybody who comes here and supports the channel. Thank you. I appreciate you. I love having a great community. Stay safe. And free Palestine.